Alrighty, excuse me. Welcome back to Mecha Mondays. I'm your intrepid host, pilot, narrator person, Fragath, and today we're going to be reading more from the Mobile Suit Gundam novelization. We are rapidly approaching the end. Things move fast. The last installment's probably going to be pretty beefy. That's looking like it's either that or I'm going to have to break it into two separate installments because my Mondays have been rough because of the day prior. But we'll see. We'll see. Yeah, see, yeah. Anyway, that's probably what I'll have to do. Regrettably. Anyway, my God. Yeah, regrettably, that's probably what I'm going to have to do because it's a little bit too long to do in one sitting. Anyway, so previously on, there was the showdown between the Federation's 127th Autonomous and Vice Admiral Dozle Zabi's battle group, in which Dozle Zabi deploys, I don't know, a bunch of ships, something like 30 Zaku's, and the Big Zam, a new mobile armor prototype, um, which regrettably doesn't last very long. Um, I mean, it doesn't really last super long in the series either, but even then, seemed to leave more of an impression than here. But that's okay. It's big, bad, and he did manage to take out one of their team. Um, I think Kriya Maja. So they're down to just Amuro in his Gundam and Kai Shiden and Hayato Kobayashi in their gun cannons. Um, and that's basically it. Now they're good. They're good at what they do, but there's only so long that they can act kind of as this bait, this galvanizing force, a Trojan horse, if you will, for the Zeon forces. And attrition is constantly building up, as we see. Um, in the series, it's Slegger Law, I believe, who he valiantly sacrifices himself or suicide pilots himself into the Big Zam, which does abjectly fail to destroy it, but does knock out some of its thrusters and otherwise damage it enough so that Amuro can get the killing blow in. Slegger Law in this has a much smaller role than he did in the series. It's one of the things I kind of like about the novelization. Not that Slegger Law gets less of a role, but they kind of mix up how it changes up how certain characters uh, are portrayed, as well as what they get up to. Also adds a ton of new characters, like Cusco Al. She's not a thing in the original series. Charlie Bull is, but he's barely present. So his increased role in this is very welcome. Um, as to which one you consider canon, well, events are going to transpire that make it pretty clear that you can't have a Zeta Gundam, or at least a significant chunk of Zeta Gundam, unless the original animated series is how things go down. But even then, still good times. And canon is such a loosey-goosey word nowadays, apparently. Especially when the controlling interest in the meta franchise as a whole doesn't really care about such things and only cares about model kit sales. Yes. Yes. Yes, Frag. Bash on Pappy Bandai. I'm sure they'll notice. I'm sure they'll care. They won't. It's okay. Unfortunately, it's also one of the reasons I'm not using. They're also one of the reasons I'm not using anything more than the Sting, the title card Sting, and also one of the reasons that I'm not using the character designs. I don't want to poke that particular beast more than I have to. They're litigious. Not as litigious as, say, Nintendo, who's just seems to be making a career out of it, but, pretty litigious. Oh, good job. I've lost my title card, Sting. Where did I put it? Oh, that's where I put it. Okay, that's actually the intelligent place to put it. Exactly why I wouldn't look there. Clever. Clever. I can't read today. There we go. I found it. Excellent. Okay. So coming up, I think. Oh, geez, is this the one with the? Oh, nice. You just dropped up a bunch of pages. Give me a sec. There we go. I think this is the one where our boy actually does something here. Charlie Aznable. I think. I wish I'd remembered that Ramba Ral got back into the series. I I seem to have I remembered it that he doesn't show up at all, but obviously he did, and he's definitely showing up a bit more in this. Come on, Charlie Aznable, where are you? Geez, maybe he's not in. Anyway, I don't actually remember what happens in this segment. It does put a stick in it. Well, I just thought I was cycling along, and then I was like, you know what? Better stick this in here and get what's not dyslexia. There's one of those aphasias or agnosias that makes it so that you can't read. No, I don't remember it. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It's trivia. I hope I never get it though, because that would really put a crimp in my style. In a big way. I laugh, but really, I would not be happy. Reading's kind of important to me. That's why we're doing it. Okay, now that I've finally found my page again. Oh, geez, these chapters are long. What's going on? Oh, that's why I have two of them. Oh. We'll do it. We'll do it. Um, I'm not gonna. I'm gonna have to split the next chunk somewhere along the line because that's like 67. That's 80 pages. No, it's not 80 pages. It's like 70 pages, which is right at the borderline. Fortunately, that's not a problem for today. Um, is there some other thing that happened in the previous? That was the biggie. Dozle Zabi, who's kind of a not enough of a character in this, in my opinion. Oh, right, we get more Giran scheming. He's made it pretty clear that he plans on friendly firing this system colony laser at his own people in order to stop the Federation, and also to whack Caecilia, who could vie for the throne. Um, So about the system colony laser, that is not wholly dissimilar to something that gets deployed in the Lensman series, which is actually it's a bigger scale, but the general idea of condensing a whole lot of solar power and using it as a directed energy weapon is used there. Lensman is a daffy series. Like every ridiculously over the top thing you can imagine in a military setting, that series not only did, it also one upped. There's like psychic judge, jury, and executioners. There's black hole weapons. Um, there's using planets as kinetic kill devices. There's using two planets as nutcrackers to break other planets. It's insanity. It's truly insane. And the thing that's most baffling is it feels like a reasonable progression within the series. Like the escalation is insane, and you're like, well, no, that makes sense. You pretty much would have to, based on what the other guy's deploying. Oh, it makes perfect sense. Like, hold up, let's think about what they've done for a second here. Anyway, In the Lensman, of course, I think that's done by having a bunch of spaceships arranged in a cylinder that then use their force fields to guide a solar flare or concentrate a sun, like they englobe a sun and make it open up one end and blast something out the other. I can't remember the exact description offhand. I'd love to read the Lensman series on stream, but it's a bunch of books and they've already been read by people better than I. Um, so it's like Dune. I'd love to read Dune on stream, but again, it's been done by people that are much better at this than I am, and I strongly advise people go out and listen to those iterations. Anyway, blather time over, and we're gonna get reading on this latest installment of Mobile Suit Gundam, Book 3, Confrontation. Chapter 19, Retreat. From General Revel's perspective, Operation Chembalo was not going well. The Federation Armada, with himself and Vice Admiral Carroll heading the primary battle groups, was steadily closing in on Aboa Ku. The vanguard, including the 127th, continued to perform well. But several units following the 127th, which were scheduled to assault the top of the umbrella-shaped fortress, had already been roundly trounced. Should the Armada lose even one of its remaining main fleets, he would be forced to rethink the entire campaign. At least the 127th is still proceeding with its attack, he thought. He was worried. Was it really safe to stake so much on such a tiny unit? He believed in the Pegasus II and its 3 suits, but he had to think about the entire Armada. There was still a deep-rooted prejudice in the forces against suits, a belief that they were just another fighting machine with a weird humanoid shape. We'd better take Aboa Ku quickly, he muttered. He wanted to avoid heavy losses, but the Zeon forces arrayed before him, including Wiegelmann's men on Aboa Ku, were putting up an impressive defense. He was particularly disturbed by the use of satellite missiles, or what were in effect huge chunks of asteroid material with old-fashioned recycled chemical rocket engines strapped to them. Like giant boulders hurled over huge distances, satellite missiles were relatively easy to avoid, but they were also cheap to assemble, and thus could be used in vast numbers. They were a crude, comic book approach to weaponry, yet they had already destroyed several state-of-the-art ships in the Earth Federation Armada. They were an absolute victory for Zeon in terms of cost performance. On Aboa Ku, after the first wave of satellite missiles was launched, the approaching Federation ships seemed to disperse their forces laterally, fanning the defenders' fear of being surrounded. Vice Admiral Randolph Wiegelmann, in charge of the fortress defenses, nonetheless remained calm. Hit each unit, he commanded. Remember, they're the most vulnerable when overextended. In the command center of the Federation flagship, Drogue, I'm okay, maybe it's Drog. It's D-R-O-G. I keep stumbling on this one. Like, you'll notice every time I say it, there's like a pause either before and after it. I'm like, is that right? I have no idea. Drog. I love the name Drog. It's so silly. Okay. In the command center of the Federation flagship Drog, General Revel was quick to detect a change in Aboa Ku tactics. Pull in our forces more, he ordered his officers. Concentrate on a weak point in their defense and break it. His order was acknowledged and conveyed, but in a typical quirk of warfare, it was also misinterpreted. The entire armada, instead of moving forward, began to retreat. Someone had misinterpreted his order to pull in as pull back, and the code "the Cembalo strings are broken" had been transmitted from his flagship to the entire armada. And it meant not attack, but retreat. Revel secretly raged at whoever had botched his orders, but he was smart enough not to scream publicly in the command center. They were in the midst of a ferocious battle, and he knew what had happened. On displays throughout the command center, remote telescope cameras showed Zeon's space fortress, Abo Aku, and repeated flashes of missiles being fired. Only an utter idiot would fail to feel terror at the sight. Retreating was the only logical thing to do. Sorry, it is not the only logical thing to do. I'm inserting words from another line. Only an utter idiot would fail to feel terror at the sight. Immediately above, retreating was the logical thing to do. My bad. It's not dyslexia. I just don't know what it is. I'm sorry. There we go. Many of the other staff officers were also furious, especially since the enemy had only just been engaged and it was too early to declare a clear victor. But Revel's next order restored their spirits. "We've no time to lose," he barked. "Our group will move to destroy the Solomon forces in front of the Corregidor Shoal Zone. Vice Admiral Carroll's group will support us." The Corregidor zone is actually named after an area in the Pacific. I think it's near the Philippines. It was important to the World War II Pacific campaign, and I can't remember where it is now. Oh, that's embarrassing. I want to say it's near the Philippines. That's what my gut is saying, and I'm distrusting that right now, and I shouldn't. I'm not going to look it up. I'm not going to look it up. Anyway. Yes, Vice Admiral Carroll's group will support us. On the Pegasus 2, Bright Noah felt the blood pound in his brain. "What the hell's going on?" he shouted to no one in particular. "If the others retreat and leave us behind in this area, we'll have the living daylights pounded out of us." He's a very shouty man, that Bright. The two other Vanguard units, the 203rd and the 165th, had already absorbed considerable damage in the earlier battles, but they were all still plunging straight for Abo Aku. Dozle Mass, the comm officer, glanced up at the ship's operator, Ensign Marker Clan, and answered Bright. "There's no mistaking the signal, sir," she said. "It's in the Alpha gain code, and it clearly reads the Cembalo strings are broken." "The code's correct, Skipper," Marker called down from his perch on the bridge crane, "but it seems odd. There's no way to confirm the movements of Revel's group at this point, but the Photofax squadron has already run into other Zeon forces out of Solomon. I can't believe Revel'd abandoned them like that, sir." "Looks like we're left guessing in the dark about our own armada," Bright grumbled, leaning back into his chair. As he watched from the bridge, he saw an explosion on yet another warship nearby. Two other Federation vessels, apparently from the 203rd, pulled alongside it, trying desperately to rescue the surviving crew. A monitor suspended above him flickered to life, and a man in a Federation captain's uniform appeared on the screen. "Right, this is Graw, commander of the 203rd. The 127th is to immediately proceed to support the Photofax squadron. When we've completed taking in survivors, we'll follow. The strings do not all appear to be broken yet." "Yes, sir," Bright quickly answered with a snappy salute. He turned and looked at Selah. She had her back to him, but she seemed to understand what he wanted, for she immediately announced over the comm system, "C-108, return to ship! Return to ship!" Bright ordered the Pegasus 2 to turn around. Then he jumped out of his seat and barked, "I want the ship immediately inspected for damage and the pressure level rechecked." He looked somehow relieved. Mirai, manning the ship's helm, took the time out to check its operation and gently scold her skipper while she did so. "I wouldn't relax too much," she said. "Trying to reach Abo Aku or joining up with the Photofax squadron, both run the same level of risk." "What kind of a comment is that, Mirai?" Bright retorted, walking over to her. "Do I look like I'm relaxing?"
A little, sir. Don't forget, we just lost Kriya Maja, one of our best MS pilots, and we only have 3 others left. It just seems to me we should try and maximize our chance of survival.
Knock it off, Mirai, Bright angrily whispered in her ear. You're starting to sound like my mother or my wife.
Sorry, she apologized, startled by his reaction.
She turned and stared silently out the window of the bridge. Behind her, she could hear him angrily ordering the others about. She couldn't stop smiling to herself.
You're getting too sensitive, Bright, she thought.
The Pegasus 2 was depending more and more on Amuro Ray, Kai Shiden, Hayato Kobayashi, and their mobile suits. Immediately after returning to the ship, the young pilots had to prepare frantically for yet another sortie. While Mecha men checked and resupplied their suits, they changed their sweat-drenched underwear and redressed in the locker room. There was no time to mourn Kriya's death.
You think Kriya had an amulet with him?
Kai wondered aloud. He always was a little careless about that stuff, Hayato answered. Maybe he didn't believe in it.
What about you, Amuro? Kai asked. You ever get an amulet from your favorite petty officer?
Amuro was startled by the question. He had been thinking of Kriya. Kriya, so long and lanky, with a tinge of green in his eyes. He replied slowly, No. He had never thought of asking her for one.
Whoa, partner, Kai said, suddenly looking very serious. Cut the jokes. You're not trying to tell us you've made it this far without one, are you? If you were a certified new type, I wouldn't worry, but hey, let's be realistic.
Hayato, donning his helmet behind Kai, chimed in. Yeah, don't forget, Amuro, we're the ones who will be leading the final assault on Abo Aku. This sure as hell isn't the time and place to wonder whether amulets work or not.
Yeah, Kai added, and don't give us this stuff about only trusting your own intuition, blah, blah, blah. It won't fly. We need you out there, pal. You're our shield, and don't get me wrong when I say it, but we're dead without you. If you weren't along, nobody in the world could get me to go on the next mission.
Yeah, Amuro, she must have given you one, Hayato said mournfully. Sorry, guys, it just wasn't like that. I know it's hard to believe.
Wasn't like that? Kai retorted. Hey, it's just like Salem Mass to do something like that, to really screw things up for us in a big way. Tell you what, I'll go ask her myself. I'll be back in a second.
Kai, knock it off! We're launching again any minute!
That's exactly why we've got to hurry, right?
All right, so this next bit is going to be a little baffling to people, and apparently is a real thing that certain suspicious people have done. I did not believe it, but it is true. I don't think it's terribly widespread, and I think it might be a relic, but here we go. Amulets were snippets of pubic hair carried by pilots to ward off bad luck. Taken lightly for years, the superstition was now widely believed. To some outside the forces, it seemed a juvenile, even somewhat obscene practice, but to the pilots it had a simple, profound meaning. They were going into battle, and if a woman could give them something symbolizing her desire for them to return alive, it would somehow help the odds. Originally, it was thought better to have an amulet from a woman living on Earth, but since waves were now working and fighting in space, they were also potential donors. In the vast emptiness of the universe, the amulets were a tangible reminder of life. Among the military, they were no laughing matter. Kai switched on the comm link to the bridge, whereupon Edouard Mass appeared on the wall display, looking a little tired.
Requesting permission from the skipper, he demanded in a loud voice, for Petty Officer Edouard Mass to come to the pilot's briefing room.
Sayla looked startled, but she did as asked and relayed the message to Bright behind her. Amuro, watching her over Kai's shoulder, couldn't help marveling at her beautiful profile. Bright appeared. "What is it?" he demanded.
Just do us a favor this once, skipper.
Oh, sorry. "Just do us a favor this once, skipper," Hayato pleaded. "Amuro needs to say goodbye to the petty officer."
And we don't have much time, sir,
interjected Kai. Bright frowned, but reluctantly consented. "Understood, but only for 10 minutes. As they watched, he tapped Sayla on the shoulder and called for a stand-in for her at the comm console. When the other crewmen arrived, Bright turned back to the monitor camera and said, "I don't want you boys to start thinking this is your final mission. Amuro, you there? You hear me, Amuro? You're to come back alive, not dead. Without you, the Pegasus 2 is a sitting duck."
Roger, sir.
Amuro moved in view of the camera so Bright could see him. Kai, standing beside him, took a page out of the little notebook pilots carried and waved it in front of the comm camera so Bright could see. It had an amulet taped to it.
Here's the problem, skipper, Kai said into the mic. This idiot doesn't have one of these.
"Humph!" Bright exclaimed with genuine anger. "So Sailor bungled it again, eh?" Kai quickly shut his notebook. Amuro couldn't resist ribbing him.
Hey, Kai, who'd you get that from, anyway? I wouldn't tell you even if hell froze over, Kai retorted, quickly slipping it into an inner jacket pocket.
You.
What had once seemed an amusing superstition, Amuro realized, was now a deadly serious ritual. When Amuro was finally alone with Sayla in a corner of the briefing room, he tried to broach the subject as casually as possible.
What? Sayla said, puzzled. What's this about an amulet? Kai and Hayato are angry at me, Sayla. They say their lives are at risk unless I get one from you before we take off. They keep bugging me about asking you, so, I thought. But, Amuro, I don't have any amulets. The closest thing I have is a locket with a photograph of my dad in it, and I can't give you that. No, that's not what I mean, Sayla. The type women give to men going off to fight these days. The ones that are real popular. Popular?
Sayla finally understood. Her expression hardened, and she stared directly at Amuro.
Do you mean to tell me that you're asking for that just because Kai and Hayato want you to? Are you serious? Kai and Hayato are serious. It's not really that big a deal to me, personally. Well, tell them no, then. But, Sayla, I know how they feel about it. Well, I don't. For the life of me, I don't understand how you have the nerve to ask me just because they want you to. Well, I'm sorry, Amuro said. Why don't you just pretend I gave you one? She said, standing up and walking out the door of the room.
Amuro tried to follow her, but she had already grabbed a lift grip in the passageway and rounded a corner several meters ahead of him. When he turned the corner, he could see her still traveling away from him, her blonde hair intermittently highlighted by the emergency lamps lining the dimly lit passageway. It was too bad about the amulet, but he would have to forget it. He just wished that they could have spent more time together. He wondered if waves used amulets, and if men normally presented them with one. When Amuro reached the flight deck, he felt a familiar sensation, the tension before going into battle. The Gundam's left hand, scorched in the fight earlier, was apparently beyond repair.
Weld the shield on the damn thing if you have to,
He shouted to one of the nearest Mecha men. Then he jumped and sailed up to the gangway on the second floor of the flight deck hangar. All the talk about amulets had at least taken some of the tension out of him. Feeling suddenly hungry, he decided to drop into the mess hall, where he ran into Kai.
Hayato was still working on his suit with the Mecha men down on the flight deck. He ordered a hamburger, took a seat, and started to wolf it down. "Well?" Kai demanded. "Got 'em, Mac," he said, deliberately trying to imitate an old gangster movie he had once seen. "3 to be exact, but I can't show 'em to you. I cut a deal with a petty officer." "Humph," Kai said, peeved. "Hey, look, if she thinks you're gonna leer over something that private, do you really think she'd hand 'em over that easily? She's got her pride, you know." "I know what's going on, Amaro. Basically, you're awfully naive when it comes to this stuff. You're just stuck on the girl, right?" "What's it to you?" "Nothing." Kai finished off his tube of coffee and prepared to return to the flight deck. "You've got a healthy attitude. Keep it up, Boy Scout." Out of the corner of his eye, Amaro watched Kai leave. He felt like he had cleared a big hurdle, but he wondered why he had not pushed Selah harder. He had wanted the amulet. He had wanted it for himself. And yet he had only been able to tell her how Kai and Hayato had been pushing him to get it from her. He wished he had more confidence. He wished he weren't always so sensitive and self-conscious around her. He wished he were older. After strapping himself into the seat of the Gundam's cockpit, Amaro communicated with the ship's bridge several times and then finally got a channel all to himself with Selah. Taking advantage of the opportunity, he quickly said, "I asked you because I wanted it, Selah. I needed it." "Understood, G3. 1 minute before launch, this line will be turned over to the flight deck controller." She had acknowledged his statement without deviating from her official tone. He suddenly felt relieved, more relieved than he would have felt even if she actually had handed him an amulet. Even if it was all a lie, and he was prepared that it might be, he was overjoyed. Then the tense voice of Callahan Slay, the flight deck supervisor, echoed in his helmet headphones. "Junior grade and Lieutenant Admiral Ray cleared for catapult." "I read you loud and clear, Callahan. Take care of C-108 and C-109 for me." "Roger, sir." Amaro heard Hayato and Kai's steady voices echo in his ear. "We're counting on you, G3." Then his main engine fired, and the G-force suddenly pushed him upward. Once more the Gundam mobile suit plunged into the star-strewn blackness. Casval Zabi's forces had been granted use of a small section of Abo Aku for their command center. It was a cramped area, and the room Commander Char Aznable. Okay. It was a cramped area, and the room Commander Char Aznable, Lieutenant Chalia Bull, and Lieutenant Junior Grade Leroy Gilliam were in, the armory, was no exception. It made Char feel even more irritated. In his drive for self-perfection, Char was mature beyond his years, but his occasional inflexibility betrayed his youth. They were waiting for Commander Garcia Dowell of the Flanagan Institute, and he hated having to meet people he didn't particularly like. Garcia, pallid as ever, rushed into the room with his files in hand. "Sorry to keep you waiting," he blurted, ignoring the salutes from Chalia and Leroy, seated behind Char. He then sat in the chair facing Char. "Please allow me to be frank, Commander," Garcia said to Char, speaking with more courtesy than normal. Char merely nodded, wondering what in heaven could have made the former clerk so agitated. "The overall battle seems to be going in our favor," Garcia said. "Revel's mysterious change of course has effectively led most of the Armada to retreat into the Corregidor Shoal Zone. Losses at this point are fairly evenly divided between us and the Federation. Abo Aku still survives. At one point, things were going so well for us that the General Staff thought we might have been able to conclude the entire war. There is one major problem, however." Garcia suddenly stopped talking and glanced at Chalia and Leroy seated behind Char.
Don't worry, these are the new type candidates your institute recommended, Char said. They may even know what's going on better than you do. And by the way, you can forget about rank in here.
Aha, now I see. Sorry. Well, let me be frank, Commander, Garcia said, repeating his earlier intro. To tell you the truth, until I heard that His Excellency Dozle Zabi's unit had been annihilated, I didn't really believe you were qualified to lead true new types.
What's this about Dozle? Char demanded, suddenly startled. Did you say annihilated?
That's right. Apparently by the White Federation MS. I'm sure you know what's going on. You're in charge of our own elite experimental new type unit, complete with rickdoms and a mobile armor. A unit, I might add, Her Excellency Caecilia thinks of as the centerpiece of her forces. Frankly, when you came back from the last battle with the Federation MS unit, Oh, sorry. Frankly, when you came back from the last battle with the Federation MS unit, having lost over half your men, I thought you were simply incompetent. But now I know I was wrong.
What makes you say that? Char asked, wishing Garcia would hurry up and get to the point.
His Excellency Dozle was in a new state-of-the-art type of mobile armor called a Big Zam, but even that didn't help him. And that's not all. Another fleet out of Solomon had the Federation forces in its area on the run. But then 2 hours later, the same new type unit arrived and destroyed over 40 of its ships.
Char turned and looked at Chalia in disbelief. With a pained expression, Chalia remarked,
They are raising their level of performance with every battle. It is possible, with just the Gundam and the two supporting red suits.
It still seems too much, Char said. Char said, still incredulous. Turning back to Garcia, he said, No one's double-checked this information yet, right?
Well, true. And we still don't know why General Revel abruptly detoured to the Corregidor shoal zone. But it's even odder that all the ships in Dozle's unit were destroyed, and that not a single Zaku survived. Normally, in an engagement, even in what we call a defeat, at least 1/4 of the Zakus are able to escape. Frankly, I don't know what's going on. Or if it's just because of the Gundam and its pilot.
What? Frankly, I don't know what's going on, or if it's just because of the Gundam and its pilot. No, that's what the sentence says. I'm not misreading it. Anyway, word salad.
But whatever it is, the Federation new type unit has become terrifyingly powerful. That's why I have to apologize to you, Commander Char. I doubted you at one point, but you came back alive after encountering the same unit that annihilated everyone else. That means you're one of the few that can actually hold your own against it. Please forgive me.
Char said, ignoring the praise. I think I get the picture. About Revel and his little detour, though. Until this last battle, I doubt if even he knew how powerful his new type unit is. But just to change the subject, whatever happened to the request I put into you?
For the extra Zakus? Garcia said with a wry grin. Well, I managed to procure 5 more for you, and we can pull pilots for them out of the second new type unit that Caecilia's planning. The order's already gone out, and they should be arriving here in a few hours.
Good. And right now, I really need the leg of my Rickdom repaired. The Federation Gundam's going to arrive here soon.
Here?
Correct. It still hasn't been destroyed, right?
True. Or at least we have no information to that effect.
Then it's on its way, Char said. And by the way, he added with a grin, instead of those 5 Zakus you mentioned, we'd really prefer Rickdoms.
I'd be glad to petition Her Excellency for you, Garcia said, gathering all of his notes together. Then, standing up, he announced, I wish you the best, Commander.
Don't worry, I'll do my best, Char replied with a smile and a snappy salute. After Garcia departed, Leroy uneasily asked Char, I don't remember if I had a voice for Leroy already, so we're going to fake it. The Gundam pilot worries me, sir. I've never heard of anyone's performance increasing exponentially in such a short time. You really think it's possible? Leroy was expecting an answer, but he didn't get one because both Char and Charlie Bull were too busy asking themselves the same question. They knew Garcia's report had to be taken with a grain of salt. Battlefield reports were often inflated 30 to 50%. If, for example, 5 mobile suits destroyed an enemy cruiser without confirming who would take credit for the kill, the reports sometimes listed 5 instead of 1. Enemy ships annihilated. Annihilated. There we go. To prevent this problem, both Principality and Federation forces planted still and video cameras with panoramic views in combat zones and used them to record the action whenever possible. But it took hours to confirm later how many ships a specific suit had bagged. Still, although Garcia's report had had fuzzy areas, the urgent manner in which he had presented it suggested that a serious debacle had occurred. From the perspective of the intelligence experts on Abo Aku, at least, the Federation's new type unit had clearly pulled off an incredible feat. Lieutenant Chalia Bull was the first to break the silence. I guess we can't afford to assume it was a one-time freak accomplishment, can we? He muttered. Chalia stared at the ceiling as he spoke, and his gaze was so intense that Char wondered if he could see straight out into space. All he could see was the ceiling's shiny, spotless gray plastic finish. He turned around in his chair and, with his chin propped on his elbow, asked, "Wait, how do you do that?"
Oh, his chin isn't actually on his elbow. It's on his hand, which is attached to his. Yeah, okay.
Sorry. That really threw me. I'm like, huh? That can't be comfortable. I'm not that flexible.
All he could see was the ceiling's shiny, spotless gray plastic finish. He turned around in his chair and, with his chin propped on his elbow, asked, "No, that's definitely how it's written."
I'm sorry. I just have this image of the dude trying to balance his chin on his elbow. I shouldn't distract myself like this, but that is just too good.
Hmm. Oh boy. Asked, "Tell me, Lieutenant, can you see through walls?" "Are you kidding, sir? I'm not a Superman." "Glad to hear it. It makes me feel better. But what the hell do you think's going on, anyway?" "I don't know, but Cusco Al said a kid named Amaro Ray was piloting the Gundam, right? I wonder if we can't communicate with him somehow." "Forget it. Like you said, we're not Supermen." Leroy felt strange watching his two superiors staring at the ceiling, conducting such a bizarre dialogue.
"Seems to me it's important," he ventured, "not to overlook the fact that this same Amaro Ray had enough charisma to charm Cusco Al. And he was younger than her, if I recall."
"She was 22, right?" Char said, suddenly turning to Leroy.
"Yes, sir," he answered reflexively, "and she wasn't always easy to get along with. I don't think she would have fallen for anyone a few years younger unless she was attracted to his innocence and sensitivity. But I'm sure there was something else about him that she found intellectually interesting, and I'll bet it was his new type potential. It's just possible that this Amaro Ray character's evolved enough to understand what we're trying to do. Maybe he would cooperate with us."
"Well," Char replied, "we can't exactly arrange a powwow with him in the middle of a battlefield, can we? Don't forget, I saw what he did to Lala Soon in combat. He can also be impulsive, rash. I'd hesitate before I'd put any trust in him."
"All I know about Ensign Lala Soon is what I read in Commander Garcia Dowell's reports, sir. Maybe she's the one responsible for triggering Amaro Ray's new type abilities. After all, as I understand it, she was a real rarity, someone with outstanding, quantifiable new type potential."
Char muttered.
"If we locate the Gundam, sir," Leroy said, "I'd be glad to initiate communication."
Char turned around and didn't answer Leroy. "I'm sure you know, Commander," Chalia said, "that we don't need to spend much time in contact with him." "I know," Char replied stonily. It's a little hard for me to say this, Chalia continued, but with all due respect, maybe you've got too much of a grudge against him to appreciate the possibilities. You've already encountered him before. Don't you think he'd answer if you approached him point blank? Leroy was so astounded by Chalia's bluntness that he nearly fell out of his chair. He remained silent and waited to see what would happen. Sure, Char said. I admit I don't like him. Ever since Lala Soon, ever since I first met him, I've had nothing but embarrassing defeats. And you know what happened in our last encounter? You think he plays dirty, right? No, I think he's just a little too single-minded, Char answered with a low self-deprecating laugh. He hadn't told anyone how Amuro Ray, the Gundam pilot, had somehow communicated with him in combat, suddenly bringing up his sister Artesia's name and claiming that he had been asked by her to kill him. The Gundam pilot's effrontery— ooh, I haven't seen that in a minute. The Gundam pilot's effrontery had been bad enough. Even worse had been the thought that his sister might want to resolve her feelings toward him in such a way. It was almost too much to bear, because he also knew that the physical distance between them was gradually shrinking, that she was coming closer and closer. It made him feel profound self-disgust. Disgust over the way he had treated her long ago, deserting her when she had needed him most. Sorry to have brought that up, Commander, said Chalia. On another tack, there is one variable in the equation that makes me nervous. We won't know unless we do a thorough check of his combat history, of course, but if this kid's too developed as a new type, we may not be able to deal with him at all. You're referring to what Leroy was suggesting earlier, about his new type potential? Right, sir. If, for example, he's so developed he's already become some sort of esper, then he's also probably on his way to becoming a new type military freak, a killing machine. We'd be slaughtered, and the only thing left would be Amuro Ray. Any way to prevent that? I don't know, but we'd better find out whether he's a real new type or a monster in a hurry. If the latter, we'd better do everything in our power to destroy him. We may even have to use some real dirty tricks to do it. Dirty tricks? You mean something like using Artesia? Char had uttered his sister's name, but not specifically for Chalia Bull. Chalia ignored it, and Leroy was left to wonder if Artesia were some sort of spy. The atmosphere was too strained for him to want to pursue the matter. When it was important for him to know more about this mystery woman, he was sure the others would tell him. Lights flared for 300 or 400 kilometers ahead of the L3 like fireworks on a distant shore, indicating the destruction of more Zeon and Federation ships. A Columbus-type transport, the L3 was built with a skeletal structure and designed to carry containers. Its only defenses were 6 missile tubes gracing its prow, stern, top, and sides. After carefully wending its way through debris in the Corregidor Shoal Zone, it finally made visual contact with Pegasus 2. It used to be commonly assumed that gravity-free conditions existed uniformly throughout the open areas of space, but around Earth there is actually a constant interplay between the gravitational forces of the Sun, the Earth, and its moon. With the Earth revolving around the Sun, and the Moon revolving around both, there are in fact points in space where the gravity of all three neutralize each other, the most dramatic being Lagrange points, where the Earth Federation built its groups of space colonies called sides. And just as there are regional differences in tides on Earth, in space, in addition to Lagrange points, there are also other smaller gravity-neutral areas, many of which are poorly defined and difficult to measure. In the space age, a great deal of debris, mainly landfill, from decades of colony construction had collected in them, creating what were called shoal zones. Occasionally, old satellites were even found in them, relics from the early days of space exploration. On the bridge of the L3, Lieutenant Junior Grade Matilda Ajan watched as the oddly shaped Pegasus 2 came into view. Then she grabbed the ship phone and announced, "Prepare to unload the number 14 starboard container block immediately." She began thinking of Amuro Ray, the young pilot whom she had run into on the Federation's LH moonbase. She knew he was attached to the Pegasus, too. He had always seemed incurably naive and romantic, but she felt indebted to him. Her fiancé, Lieutenant Woody Malden, was a straight-laced military engineer with whom she had fallen in love at first sight, but she had a contrary streak in her that never allowed her to admit it. Just when she had been frantically trying to figure out a way to get him to propose to her, Amuro had happened to be around, and, luckier yet, Woody had noticed him. After she had mentioned Amuro's name in an offhand way several times, Woody, the stalwart, reserved Woody, had become visibly jealous. Eventually, he had gotten the message and asked her to spend the rest of her life with him. "You mean you want me to be your wife?" she had asked. "Damn straight," he had replied. When the current campaign was over, Matilda planned to have a real wedding, and she hoped Amuro Ray would come. "I wonder how he's doing," she whispered to herself, only to be overheard by the young skipper of the L3 standing behind her. "You say something?" he grumbled. "I was just wondering if we were going to tie up alongside the Pegasus too, that's all." Now how the hell do you think we'd have time to do that?" the skipper said, irritated. "If we had the time to socialize, we sure as hell wouldn't do it here. This is the Corregidor Shoal Zone, for God's sake, and we could be hit by floating debris at any moment." "Yes, sir. Yes, sir," Matilda replied with a slightly sarcastic smile. She carefully watched as containers from the L3's cargo bays were ejected from the skip and floated into the Pegasus's open stern hatch. Then she turned and looked at the skipper again. He was in the process of communicating with the Pegasus. "You mind?" she asked. He slammed a magnetized file he had been holding down on the metal console panel in front of him and made an odd motion with his chin. She knew it indicated no, and took the bridge mic in hand. "Junior Grade Lieutenant Matilda Ajan of the 28th Supply Division, wishing to give a message for Junior Grade Lieutenant Amuro Ray of the Pegasus 2. Behind her, the L3 skipper muttered something about private communications being punishable under ship's regulations, but she ignored him. On a monitor before her, she could see a pleasant-looking wave from the Pegasus busily preparing to record her message. Yes, Lagrange is a, Lagrange. Sorry, you're right. But it doesn't work, though. It has to be pronounced Lagrange, because otherwise, how can you do the song Home, Home on Lagrange? Where the comets and asteroids play? Where seldom is heard a encouraging or discouraging bird? And the stars shine brightly all day? No? Thank you, though. It is Lagrange, because they are French. I think I knew that on some level, but I just haven't been doing it correct. Because my brain is saying one thing, even if it's wrong. Good brain. Bad brain. I interrupted myself mid-line. Behind her, the L3 skipper muttered something about private communications being punishable under ship's regulations, but she ignored him. On a monitor before her, she could see a pleasant-looking wave from the Pegasus busily preparing to record her message. "Tell him," she said, "that I'm getting married when this campaign's over, and that he's invited to the wedding." "Did you say wedding?" The blonde comtech on the Pegasus asked reflexively. Wedding was such an unexpected word, given the environment they were in, that it didn't register at first. "Yes, give him my greetings, and wish him good hunting." "Understood. Consider it done." Matilda smiled when she heard the chipper reply. She had encountered the petty officer twice before, but didn't remember her name or much about her. She knew intuitively, however, that Amuro Ray probably had fond thoughts for her.
Hey, the L3 skipper behind her yelled. No private chit-chat, remember?
He angrily grabbed her shoulder and tried to turn her in his direction, but she was faster than he and brushed off his hand. Her cheeks were flushed with indignation. The Pegasus II is directly under General Revel's command, and Amuro Ray is the key pilot on the warship, she admonished him. I frankly consider it my duty to establish friendly communications with him. It wasn't a very logical response, but she said it with enough emotion to throw the skipper off, and for a moment her performance had won out. On the monitor, the Pegasus's blonde comtech chuckled, and then the screen went blank. The L3 skipper, humiliated on both sides by two attractive women, just sulked. Don't worry, Captain, Matilda said, tapping his arm as if to console him. You look great. Then she walked over to the other side of the bridge. He stared at her shapely back and for a second almost forgot about being angry. Then he shouted, Rules aren't just created to be broken, you know. I'll remember that, Matilda replied softly. No, totally fair. Some people hate being corrected. I will happily be corrected. I can't promise that I'll do it right every time. Oh, I just realized that I was talking into my mug as I said that. That probably had really interesting harmonics. No, it's, because it's constructive criticism. I'll take it. I will do that in future, but it does mean that all the fun songs about Lagrange points are out the window, because you can't rhyme home on the range with Lagrange. It's hard. I don't know, man. It sort of defeats the purpose. But yes, they are Lagrangian points. Lagrange points, sorry. I have seen it with Lagrangian. I'm not sure if that's correct now. Anyway, yes, French mathematician. On the Pegasus II, the pilots and core crew, those with the most new-type potential, spontaneously gathered together in the briefing room for a brainstorming session, led by Bright Noah. Lieutenant Junior Grade Slegger Law, true to form, barged in on them, joking, Maybe you guys are all just hallucinating, again. Slegger, Bright said, sounding very much like the ship's captain, if you're just here to make trouble, you'd better leave.
I don't know what Amuro saw out there, Kai was saying, but when we contacted Dozle's fleet, I really felt the presence of something powerful. How about you, Hayato?
I'll say, Hayato immediately responded. I'm not sure it was really from the mobile armor Amuro told us to aim at, but whatever it was, the closer we got, the more powerful it felt, and the more I knew we had to destroy it. Kai and I never actually established visual contact because we had to train our sights on the Gandao flagship and cover for Amuro. But I don't think that contradicts what Amuro says about a specter-like force out there. It's just that I was in a combat zone right behind Dozle's unit, and I didn't sense anything that powerful. I'm sure it could exist, though.
I felt something, Mirai said, then turning to Sayla and adding, You did too, didn't you?
Yes, Sayla answered, choosing her words carefully. I think I know what Kai's talking about. There are forces out there that are concentrated, and those that are not, and I can understand how Amuro would have sensed them in Dozle's unit. Bright turned to Amuro. Maybe this requires a leap of the imagination, he said, but do you suppose Dozle Zabi himself, Dozle, the individual, could have been the source of what you saw? But, sir, Amuro protested, do you really think a commander, a vice-admiral, in the Principality of Zeon would expose himself at the front in a mobile armor? From everything we know about Dozle Zabi, Amuro, it sounds exactly like the sort of thing he'd do. He's one of the top Zabi family leaders, right? Amuro said, clasping his There's a line break there. Clasping his hands together on the desktop in front of him and laughing in bewilderment. You mean to say that maybe the apparition, or whatever it was that I saw, was generated by some sort of weird Zabi psychospasm of rage and frustration? Sounds a little too far-fetched for me. No one in the room responded. In a typically boorish attempt to grab Sayla's attention, Sleggar Law leaned over and grumbled, "Hey, you really believe all this stuff?" "It could all be real," Sayla answered, trying to signal for help from Kai by raising her voice. "If not, I'm sure Kai would do something about it." Kai came to her defense immediately.
"Knock it off, Sleggar. Amaro's already proposed having a party tonight." "A what?"
"A party," Amaro interjected. "It's a way for me to repay my fellow pilots for something." Sleggar glanced at Amaro and Sayla. Sayla met his gaze for a second, and then smiled, as if to confirm what Amaro had just said. Hey, sweet Sayla," Sleggar persisted in his typically crude fashion. "Did you really let the kid do that to you? Where's that leave me? Baby, tell me it's not true." "Sleggar! Kai! Amaro!" Bright finally yelled. "Cut the yapping! We've got important things to discuss. The Pegasus 2 may take in dip... It may... I think the book could have stood to have this edition could have stood to have a once over on where some of the line breaks are. There is an uncanny number of words that get broken in the middle from line breaks. And that's throwing me more than I normally am. The Pegasus 2 may take independent action soon, so what we decide here now may have life and death significance for us later. Time's not on our side, guys, so can the jokes." "Jokes?" Sleggar said. "Whoa, that's below the belt. We're not joking here, Skipper." I don't remember what voice I used for Sleggar before, but we're going with this now. Sorry, there's a lot of characters in this. That I've been able to keep most of them straight has been impressive, thanks. Hyperion is even worse. It's like, oh my god. I'm like, okay, they were in there 3 chapters ago. They did what again? So it's like, it's a good thing I've read Hyperion a lot and it's really well written and secure in my head. But it's been like 10 years, so. Sorry, where were we? Right. Amaro and Kai looked at each other. Both of them had noted Bright's words with alarm. Amaro shot a questioning expression in Mirai's direction. She understood what it meant, gently tapped Bright's hand, and asked,
"Excuse me, sir, but what are you talking about? What do you mean by independent action? Did you get new instructions from General Revel?"
"No," Bright said, as if surprised she had asked. "Not at all. I was just speculating. Just sort of suddenly occurred to me, that's all." "Really?" said Sleggar. "It didn't sound that way."
"Hey, Sleggar," Kai added in a clipped tone. "He can say anything he wants to here. This is a brainstorming session, right? And it may be our last."
Sleggar adjusted the collar of his uniform and turned toward Bright. "Sorry, Skipper. Speculate all you want." "Well," Bright continued, "considering how much we've already accomplished on the Pegasus 2 this far, I'm beginning to wonder what our true potential is. It's just a fantasy, but I've been thinking maybe we could even take on Supreme Commander Giran Zabi ourselves, without the rest of the Armada. And do it soon. Like tomorrow or the day after." Amaro let out a low whistle. The one that lots mispronounced is Euler. Yes, Euler, yeah. Well, that's a toughie. I can understand that. I can understand that. Sorry, I shouldn't interrupt midway through. Normally I don't, but it's a Monday, and Mondays are hard. I know, I've fallen into that stereotypical crowd, right? Eesh. This is taking a lot longer than I thought it would. Amaro let out a low whistle. Mirai, shocked, nonetheless managed to quip, I never knew you had such a vivid imagination, Skipper. I'm going to have to rethink my whole impression of you. I know it sounds crazy, Bright added with a sheepish grin. As I said, I'm just speculating. I guess I'm trying to make 2 points. First, if it's true that Amuro's new type abilities actually allowed him to detect a spectre-like malevolent force emanating from Dozle Zabi, then we seriously have to rethink the root cause of the entire conflict. If specific individuals are responsible for its continuation, then Girin Zabi's a logical candidate, and if so, maybe our main mission should be to eliminate him. Second, I think the current Earth Federation's position, that Abo Aku is Zeon's final line of defense, is a little naive. I don't know about you guys, but it's even occurred to me that maybe Zeon's deliberately letting us get this close. If nothing else, the confusion among our own forces has given them valuable breathing room. And frankly, I'm worried that the rumors we've heard are true, that they've prepared some sort of ultimate secret weapon. What do you all think? It took Amuro to express the sentiments of the others. So that's why you're in a hurry, he said in a near whisper. Bright knew that during peacetime it usually took the collective will of the people to transform a system of government. But the Pegasus was at war, and in war a successful localized military action could fundamentally alter the balance of power, even topple the existing order. The Earth Federation forces had been able to resist Girin Zabi thus far simply because of their material superiority. But if they were really only a lumbering aggregate of individuals with no overarching philosophy, no basic values, and no vision, as many complained, then all Girin Zabi would need to achieve his dreams would be a single dramatic victory. It was entirely possible that, as Bright had tried to imply, they were already ensnared by his consciousness. In fact, Bright had wanted to say it, that it was all a matter of consciousness. He started to speak again, hesitated for a second, and to his surprise, Amuro spoke for him. We've enjoyed General Revel's support, Amuro said, but never that of the entire Earth Federation. And without it, we'll lose the war. But if Girin Zabi is the main force behind this war, and if he really does have such a powerful presence, we'd be able to detect it even easier than we did with Dozle. A malevolent force, Kai added, only half joking. We're dealing with a monster. And what the skipper's saying isn't all speculation, Mirai chimed in. Exactly, Amuro answered. If we have the ability to detect such a force, I say we should go ahead and capture Girin Zabi. If it'd end the war, I think maybe we should do it. The word maybe betrayed the doubt behind his otherwise confident expression. Think we could persuade General Revel to help? Slegger asked, as it slowly dawned on him what his mysterious crewmates were really suggesting. And if we could, you seriously think there's a snowball's chance in hell of us partying over to the Drog today and having the brass that surround Revel actually let us see him? Let's be realistic, guys. We've got the most powerful warship in the entire Earth Federation forces. If they think we've got enough time to screw around with ideas like this, first thing they'd tell us to do would be destroy Abo Aku. Hey, that rhymes. Slegger was right, but Amuro's next observation startled everyone even more. Actually, something else that worries me even more than that. Oh, it's missing than. My brain inserted it, but then I caught up with what I was reading. Actually, yeah, it's misprinted. Cool. Actually, something else that worries me even more than that, he said. Say, for the sake of argument, we did as the skipper's thinking, and did succeed in deposing Girin and ending the war. What would happen then? Well, for starters, we'd probably be punished for violating military discipline. But an even bigger problem is that the Earth Federation's General Staff Headquarters, Jaburo, would still be around. That's an idea I don't like. You mean it might take 10 or 20 years to get promoted in the military, Bright said with a wink, and eventually be given high-ranking government positions? No, Amuro said with an unexpectedly serious look on his face. I think you can assume that whatever happens to us might not be that positive. Why? Amaro turned and looked at everyone in the room. "Don't get me wrong," he said. It's not that I don't believe in democracy. It's just that using simple majority rule to decide everything makes me a little nervous, especially because in the Federation government, the final decisions really represent a consensus of the interests of the politicians themselves. I can imagine a scenario where we succeed in destroying Garen, only to have people start asking, why? Why, out of all the Federation forces, was the Pegasus 2 able to do it? The answer, of course, would be that we're new types, a bunch of paranormal espers, a bunch of professional killers. They'd even start to question whether new types and normal people can coexist. They'd say we dominate normal people and threaten everything they value. Just think of the possibilities. Everybody fibs once in a while in the real world, but they'd say that new types can see right through normal people, read their thoughts like a book. They'd say that we're a supernatural phenomenon, that we're not humans in the normal sense of the word, that we're freaks who should be banished from normal human society. What are we going to do if people start talking this way? Forget about being promoted. Hell, we should worry about surviving.
Not the most eloquent speech I've ever heard.
Ugh. Sorry, Kai. Gunk in my throat.
Not the most eloquent speech I've ever heard, Kai muttered, nodding and looking at the others. But not bad. I think Amaro's right.
Slegger, always trying to look as informed as possible, turned in his seat and asked Sayla, "Listen, you know Zeon Deikun, the guy who first talked about new types and founded the republic that became the Principality of Zeon? Wasn't he murdered by the Zabi family?"
Zeon Deikun? Sayla replied cautiously. I don't know about that, but I do know he was a good man. And he wasn't talking about the kind of new types Amaro's been referring to. He was talking about an enlightenment that all mankind would experience. But I can see Amaro's point about society possibly wanting to purge itself of new types.
Amaro's right, Bright added. The Earth Federation needs us as long as there's a war on, but who knows what'll happen when the war's over? The average person may usually know what's right and wrong, but usually he also winds up going along with what his government says.
Let's not deal in generalizations, Mirai said suddenly. Don't forget we may be forced to make some decisions on our own real soon. We'd better have a clear idea what we're going to do then. Well, we could always fight just hard enough to stay alive, Kai interjected.
No, Bright answered firmly. If we did that, we'd probably be targeted by some final weapon Zeon's developing, and that'd be the end of us.
How do you know that, Skipper? Amaro asked.
I don't know, Bright shot back. I'm just hazarding a guess based on some highly circumstantial evidence. There had to be more to it than that, Amaro thought. He suddenly realized that Bright's own intuition and awareness were increasing. It all made sense.
You were right, he said. We should get rid of Garen Zabi.
How?
Amaro grinned and said, Well, we obviously can't pull off a frontal assault, but maybe there's someone close to him who would cooperate with us. Say, be a co-conspirator. That would help.
He really had no idea what he was trying to say. He was just fantasizing, letting his mind go, and relying on his own intuition. Co-conspirator?
Right. I'm thinking along the same lines as you, Skipper. Someone, for example, like Char Aznable, the Red Comet.
You mean initiate contact with their new types? But Char was under Dozle Zabi's command.
That's why I say, sir, maybe the whole thing's a fantasy.
I think we'd better take a break from this discussion, Bright finally announced. We'll be staying at Level 3 battle stations until we get further operational orders. As the group dispersed, it was Slegger, of all people, who summed up things with unexpected brilliance.
Humph. Maybe I'm a little slow compared to the rest of you new type candidates, but I fail to see how anyone here could be a freak. Seems like the ultimate criterion for a normal human is to be able to fall in love, and that's already happened.
Aw, he's sensitive, too. Sliger's actually kind of a jerk in in the original series, but kind of a jerk. He's kind of horrible by modern standards of masculinity, but he's still an engaging, entertaining character, even if he is kind of dated. Amuro slipped off the. Oh wow, that caught me quick. I'm sorry. Wow, this chapter is long. How long does this chapter go? Oh, there we go. Amuro slipped off the lift grip and looked back at the ship's passageway he had just traversed. At the other end, under one of the emergency combat lights, he could see Sayla standing and talking with Mirai. He felt awkward because he hadn't invited her to join him in his room. I don't think I pronounced that correct. I don't think I enunciated that well. I'm sorry. He felt awkward because he hadn't invited her to join him in his room. A gulf had existed between them ever since she had made her crazy statement about killing her brother, but he still wanted her. He was a male with normal desires, and his nerves were frayed from combat. He thought about inviting her. He thought of how nice it would be to spend even 10 minutes alone with her and feel her touch, and he wondered if she felt the same way, if she missed him too. But he felt a pang of guilt at his thoughts, at his desire to wait for her, after all. But he was unable to turn and walk away. What? At his desire to wait for... Oh, okay. Only a few minutes earlier he had been having philosophical discussions about new types. Now he was hoping for some physical attention from a woman. The contrast made him wonder how anyone in a normal human body could really become a true new type. Standing and waiting for Sayla, he felt like an utter fool. He waited for a minute, and it seemed like an eternity. He suddenly resolved to forget her for the time being. He loosened the collar of his pilot suit, turned around, and started to head for his quarters. To his astonishment, Sayla skipped off the floor and grabbed onto a lift grip running down the passageway toward him. From his perspective, she was flying through the air. She was headed in his direction, coming toward him. In his rational mind, he hesitated, fearing he was expecting too much. But then he saw her float away from the lift grip right at him, her blonde hair shining so beautifully in the light. He wondered if other men felt the way he felt now, and suspected they would have been more cool, confident, and detached. Sorry. Though he is attached as well. Sayla floated up to him and stopped, with her soft breasts against his chest.
Well, what happened, Mr. Amuro Ray?
I was afraid you wouldn't come, that's all.
You didn't ask me, so I thought I'd better not come. But Mirai said I should. And there's something I wanted to tell you anyway.
Amuro was no longer listening. He put his lips over hers. He knew from her response that she wanted him to touch her, that he could feel free to be with her. And he felt happy.
Amuro, Sayla said, playfully turning her head and pulling away from his embrace, you're violating military regulations, you know.
With the wonderful sensation of her kiss lingering in his mind, he opened the door to his quarters, entered, and turned on the light.
By the way, you took that message from...
Oh, sorry, he is saying that.
By the way, you took that message from Lieutenant Matilda Ajan, right? Do I really have to attend her wedding ceremony? He asked. Well, maybe she likes you, Amuro, Sayla said with a giggle. She probably thinks you're cute.
Cute was the last word he wanted to hear. He had never really expected anything of Matilda. She was an awfully attractive wave, and he had always enjoyed seeing her. To her, however, he had just been another earnest pilot candidate.
She said she's having a military wedding, Amuro, and I'm sure she just wants to invite a few people who've been nice to her. I'm sure she has lots of friends outside her immediate co-workers.
No need to reassure me. Either way, I won't have to decide whether to go or not until this campaign's over.
But that's just it, Amuro. For a woman, a wedding's important. It's like an affirmation of life. Course, I don't really go along with that stuff myself. Matilda's a little too feminine for me.
Selah put her hair up, stood up, and crossed the room toward the shower. It was a joy just to watch her move, Amaro concluded. She looked fantastic even in a cocky military-issue bath towel. But he also knew they would never have enough time together, for the war was still on. He began to ponder some of the things at the meeting said. Let's try this sentence again. He began to ponder some of the things said at the meeting earlier. He was irritated by his own fickleness. It seemed that as soon as one problem was solved, he immediately started thinking of another. He was just glad that he hadn't raised the issue of Char again, or Selah would have thought that was the only reason he had invited her to join him. It would be better to interact with her on only one level now, and that was physical. When Selah came out of the shower, she gave him a quizzical look, but he didn't respond, and entered the shower room himself. In order to compensate for the weightless environment, showers on board ship used pressurized steam blasted from all angles. To prevent drowning, there was a barrier in the shower that isolated the head to keep it kept it dry. I'm going to take this paragraph from the top because it's these cute little technical details that show that Tomino really paid attention in science fiction class. There's a lot of these little granular details outside of the giant 16 to 18 meter tall humanoid robots with microfusion reactors and particle beams and all that, and people who are maybe not quite psychic. Outside of all that, a lot of the technical details are remarkably on point. More on point than average science fiction, even fairly gritty stuff gets up to. And it's not boring. When Selah came out of the shower, that's the top of the paragraph. When Selah came out of the shower, she gave him a quizzical look, but he didn't respond, and entered the shower room himself. In order to compensate for the weightless environment, showers on board ship used pressurized steam blasted from all angles. To prevent drowning, there was a barrier in the shower that isolated the head and kept it dry. He rested his head on a chin rest, and resolved to discuss the matter of Char with Selah later, after all. When he emerged, to his surprise, he found she wanted to talk about her brother. He had come to Amaro's room partly because she, too, had been unable to stop thinking about what Bright had said, and partly, since Amaro had brought up Char's name, because she felt the need to resolve the issue between them.
Casval always said he was going to avenge father's death, she began, but that was 7 or 8 years ago, before we parted. We were both still kids then. I received a few letters from him after he entered military academy on Zeon, not the usual video cards, but old-fashioned typed letters. He never wrote anything beyond the usual pleasantries, but I got the sense he was maturing, and that he wasn't just in the academy to carry out his crazy plan for revenge. I really felt he was growing wiser and wiser. And you know what? He told me one of his classmates was Garma Zabi, the youngest son of Sovereign Deikun Zabi. He said they were really good friends. Can you believe that?
You know what, Selah? Garma Zabi was piloting the Gaw bomber that we ran into after leaving Side 7, and your brother was probably in the same area. I wonder what it all means.
I don't know. I didn't have the same awareness of him then that I do now. The official combat reports I read were all so rough, it was impossible to really tell anything from them. What do you think?
It seems to me, if I recall rightly, that he didn't defend the Gaw bomber. I'm sure it wasn't intentional. I think he just wasn't in a position to do anything about it.
Maybe some people in the Principality think he's responsible for the death of a Zabi family member, but I don't think my brother's that careless.
Let's hope not. But tell me, Selah, getting back to the discussion we all had earlier, how do you think we could contact your brother? That's our main problem. The second problem is deciding whether or not he's actually approachable.
I don't think my brother's basically changed much, Amaro. But you know, there's something else I've never told you about him. Remember the Texas colony? Actually, I met my brother there before it blew.
You what?
Amro practically gasped. Selah had her face turned to the side and was staring into space, as if embarrassed.
I'm sorry, she said. Sorry? You don't need to feel sorry, Selah. I don't care if you meet him. I just want to know how, in heaven's name, you managed to meet him. There was a pitched battle going on inside the colony.
Selah shrugged.
I felt as if Casval were calling me, she said. But you know what? When we actually came face to face, he seemed just like the brother I remembered. He had never even sent me a photograph of him all those years, but I recognized him right away. He warned me not to get involved in the war. I could get emotional about it, but he was my brother, tough and gentle at the same time.
Selah's information was extremely important to Amro, for it gave him a new insight into Char Aznable's character. If both Char and Selah had the same new type attributes, then perhaps Char's feelings toward his own sister could be exploited. It was a dangerous, naive idea, but everything he had heard about Char so far seemed to confirm his rapidly forming opinions. Both Amaro and Selah were being sentimental, but it made both of them happy. As a brief aside on the subject of mispronounced, call them mathematician names, like Lagrange and Euler, how do you pronounce Tycho? I think it's Brahe. Tycho Brahe. I don't know how that's pronounced. I would actually be interested because that name pops up a lot in moderately near future science fiction, and I don't know much about the guy, and I don't know how the name is pronounced. I'm assuming it's a guy. I'm pretty sure. I'm dimly aware that I think they're from Sweden, Switzerland, one of the Nordic countries. Oh, I don't remember where he's from. Anyway, as people are probably noticing, things are coming to a head pretty quickly. The plot lineup is really lining up. The plot lines are lining up here. You've got Char and his group's concerns about Amro being like a murderous, relentless killing machine because he's just literally too good, and they didn't expect it. Amro's like, this is a good idea. Maybe I should use his sister in order to manipulate him, or at least help get an in, even though he's already kind of done that, and Char immediately distrusted him as a result. Because he did the equivalent of yelling out, "Hey, I fucked your sister." And he's like, "Hold up! Hold the phone! This guy's bad news." Because Amaro's impulsive. He doesn't always do Danish. Taiho. Okay. Brahi. Okay. Taiho Brahi. Okay, that makes sense. I'm going to try very, very hard to remember that going forward. If I occasionally say Tycho, you know exactly what I'm doing wrong. I have probably done it, because I think there's a crater on the moon named after him. Tycho Brahe. Danish. Okay. Which isn't really a Nordic country, but I guess they're Nordic enough. Oh, wait. It's a chapter break. One sec. Oh, it's Tycho. Oh, okay. So I have unconsciously pronounced it correctly for some reason. Cool. Because it looks like it's... But I knew his last name. Okay, Brahe. Tycho Brahe. Tycho Brahe. Chapter 20. A Stirring. Looking at Crowley Hammon made Casval Zabi wish she hadn't been born with such a long face and beady eyes. Crowley was 2 or 3 years older than she, but looked considerably younger. She wore her hair up, with the beautiful nape of her neck exposed, and exuded femininity.
Well, Caecilia icily asked, where have I met you?
She couldn't quite place the woman, but knew she'd seen her before somewhere.
I went to a couple of the Supreme Commander's parties a long time ago, Excellency. Perhaps we met then.
And you were probably one of the party girls Girin loved to invite,
Caecilia thought. A letter in front of her from Prime Minister Darshia Bakharov formally introduced Crowley, but something about it bothered her. Why was such a person being presented this way by the Prime Minister?
You were a friend of Girin? She asked.
It was many years ago, Excellency.
Does Dacia know about this? Does Dacia know this?
Yes.
Crowley Hammond then proceeded to claim that her past was a major reason Darcia had given her the assignment.
When the war's over, she said in a hushed voice, I plan to marry Lieutenant Ram Baral of the Secret Service. I'm sure you know, but he's the eldest son of Jim Baral.
Aha, I see.
The woman had a complex background, and it irritated Caecilia that she had neither the time nor the means to investigate it further.
Tell me, Miss Crowley, she asked, if you're responsible for obtaining the information presented in this letter, shall I assume you're also the one who sold it to Dacia? To Dacia? Do you have a grudge against my brother Girin?
Forgive me, Excellency, but that's a question I'd rather not answer. I wish I could say no.
Well, that certainly makes it hard for me to trust you, doesn't it?
Caecilia picked up the letter from her desk and walked over toward the giant aquarium in her office. The red sword-tails, as usual, were swimming around and around in a school, their scales flashing in the light. The fact that Darshia's letter hadn't come through official channels was definitely odd, but it also made her suspect it was genuine. After the Federation Armada had mysteriously shifted its offensive away from Abo Aku to the Corregidor Shoal Zone, which I'm also probably mangling the pronunciation of. I'm sorry. Not Shoal Zone, that's easy. Corregidor. I don't know. I'm guessing. After the Federation Armada had mysteriously shifted its offensive away from Abo Aku to the Corregidor Shoal Zone, several regular transports from the Principality had arrived at the fortress, and Crowley Hammond had been aboard one. She carried false identity papers listing herself as one of Caecilia's household servants, and brought several trunks of Caecilia's personal effects, trunks that had been hand-packed by one of Caecilia's senior domestics. Unknown even to Crowley, her elaborate cover had been arranged not only by Prime Minister Darshia Bakharov, but by none other than Sovereign Deigun Zabi himself. She had been dispatched as a special emissary, but without Deigwin's help, she never would have made it past Girin Zabi's Secret Service agents. Caecilia's natural suspicions were aroused by the mysterious machinations behind Crowley's mission. That Darshia had tried so hard to protect her suggested that his own position had been compromised. He had written the letter on special paper that would dissolve immediately in stomach acid, and hidden it in Crowley's belt buckle. If Crowley had been caught by one of Girin's operatives, all she would have had to do was swallow the letter. The letter appeared to be entirely in Darshia's handwriting, and even concluded with his signature. But its contents were so horrifying that Caecilia immediately wished she could double-check its authenticity with computer analysis. It was too bad the equipment for that was under the control of the commander of Abo Aku, Vice Admiral Randolph Wiegelman, a fanatical supporter of Girin. The letter contained a warning. The Earth Federation Armada would soon reach Abo Aku, Darshia wrote, and when it did, Girin Zabi planned to activate the system strategy, probably targeting Abo Aku itself. That meant, Caecilia realized, that Girin not only was willing to sacrifice his own troops and one of his most faithful admirals, but that he wanted to eliminate her as well.
Tell me, Crowley, she asked, do you think Darcia's fully aware of the implications of this information? And, equally important, is Lieutenant Rambaral informed of your assignment?
Then she remembered something about Crowley Hammond. Several years ago, she recalled, Crowley had been one of several women with whom Giron had consorted.
2 days after I first reported to the Prime Minister, Crowley answered, he summoned me and ordered me to convey this information to your Excellency at all costs. I was also ordered to explain the circumstances in which the information was obtained. The Prime Minister told me I was the most qualified person for this assignment. As for your question about Lieutenant Rambaral, no, I don't see him every day, and he doesn't know what I'm doing here today.
Crowley continued talking, and Caecilia learned that because the authorities were rushing to perform a final check on the system project, security was being heavily enforced, that the Secret Service was inspecting every military ship leaving the Principality, and all troops involved in the system project had been prohibited. Oh, I misread that. That's okay. Part of that is that some of these sentences are kind of long in the tooth, and that compounded with some of the what I find to be awkward line breaks is throwing me. That and it's my head state. It's not the best translation in the world. It's actually a really good translation, all things considered, but it's like part of it is Tomino dialogue and Tomino script, and Tomino writes in a weird way. He's a bit of an odd one. You can wrap your head around him, but it really takes time. And you either love him or you hate him. I don't think you can really have middling opinions. I think he's pretty divisive. I happen to be in the former camp. I'm quite a fan. Even his bad stuff, I find something to enjoy out of. Let's try that again. Where were we? Crowley continued. We're just going to take the paragraph from the top. Crowley continued talking, and Caecilia learned that because the authorities were rushing to perform a final check on the system project, security was being heavily enforced. That the Secret Service was inspecting every military ship leaving the Principality, and all troops involved in the system project had been prohibited from leaving their stations. So, what threw me about that one is that there is. So, we're going to do Frag dissects grammatical notations. We're doing that again. We're bringing it back. Here is the sentence, the whole thing. It is one whole sentence, right? Yes, that is one whole sentence. I'm going to read the whole sentence with grammatical notations included. Just so you have some idea what I'm talking about. Crowley continued talking, and Caecilia learned that because the authorities were rushing to perform a final check on the system project, security was being heavily enforced, that the Secret Service was line break, was inspecting every military ship leaving the Principality, and all troops involved in the system project had been prohibited from leaving their stations. In an ideal world, there'd be another semicolon there. Or a hyphen break or something. But there is no semicolon after Principality, so that was really throwing me very badly. So I like occasionally to get into the meat of what makes doing this kind of tricky and what the sort of things you pick up on when you have just enough knowledge of how sentences are supposed to be constructed to be dangerous to yourself when reading it aloud, and not enough experience in actually doing that. Certainly not in a professional capacity. Though this year is going to be tripling basically what I've done. All right, so we're going to reread it again so that people have at least the contextual gist without the interruption. Crowley continued talking, and Caecilia learned that because the authorities were rushing to perform a final check on the system project, security was being heavily enforced. That the Secret Service was inspecting every military ship leaving the Principality. Oh, I misread it the second time. That's what the problem was. Oh my God. Oh. Okay, so it's actually written really well, and my brain was too dumb to pick up on it. Ow, that's my tooth. Don't do that. Mm. Oh, okay. So If I could remember my old grammatical terms, I could tell you how this is broken up intelligently and dissect it in a literary fashion, but we're not going to do that. Suffice it to say, it's actually written correctly, and my brain just didn't pick up on it correctly at all. It's fine. It's fine. Until the fourth time through. Okay. So we're going to try this again. I'm so sorry. It's not always this bad. Unless it's CJ Cherry. I love CJ Cherry, but man, every part of the buffalo, every part of the grammatical notation buffalo is used. Crowley continued talking, and Caecilia learned that because the authorities were rushing to perform a final check on the system project, security was being heavily enforced. That the Secret Service was inspecting every military ship leaving the Principality, and all troops involved in the system project had been prohibited from leaving their stations. Ramba Ral had apparently complained to Crowley that he was too overwhelmed with work to move freely, and that he also had to look extra busy simply to maintain Girin's trust. Caecilia made a mental note to this final comment, and then concluded that Ramba Ral was unusually insecure in his relationship with Girin.
Didn't you say just a minute ago that Ramba Ral was the son of Jimba Ral?
Yes, Excellency.
And Jimba Ral, as I recall, was one of the central figures in the old Deikun faction.
That's correct, Excellency. Ramba never told me the whole story, but he did mention he had recently obtained information on the whereabouts of Casval and Artesia Deikun.
Casval and Artesia? Do you mean he uncovered information on Zeon Deikun's 2 children, who were reported to have been taken from the Principality by Jimba Ral? So the rumor was true?
Crowley said nothing, and Caecilia didn't waste time pursuing the matter. She was sure Crowley herself didn't have the answer. The strange thing was that Girin would let any man near him who confided in his girlfriend so easily. Girin was fanatical about secrecy, but from what Crowley had said, Ramba Ral obviously blabbered far too much. What, she wondered, could a lieutenant in the Secret Service, a man Girin certainly knew was the son of Jimba Ral, be thinking? What could his real motivations be? The names of Casval and Artesia Deikun brought back strong memories for Caecilia. In the old days, when Zeon Deikun and her father, Degwin Zabi, had struggled to establish the Republic of Zeon, she had often played with the 2 young Deikun children. They both had looked like they had stepped out of an illustrated children's storybook, lovable, fair-haired, perfect infants, and she had been extremely fond of both of them. She practically blushed at the memory, but around the time that she had reached puberty, she had secretly fantasized of one day meeting a fair-haired man and having children like Casval and Artesia.
Thanks for the information, she said. You're dismissed for now, Crowley.
There were gaps in what Crowley had said, but she knew they could be filled in later. And even if Zeon Deikun's 2 orphaned children were still alive, it was inconceivable that they could have any effect on her current situation. The instant Crowley Hamon's purple suit disappeared behind her office door, Caecilia suddenly thought of something. 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 Perhaps Ramba Ral felt nervous about his relationship with Girin precisely because of the information about the Deikun children. Perhaps they could affect what was going on. She stared at her office door and suddenly realized young Casval's presence was much stronger in her subconscious than she had believed. She could almost imagine him walking through the door in front of her.
Perhaps, she mused, it has something to do with my having taken Char Aznable under my wing.
Then, in a revelation, she made the connection.
Could Char Aznable actually be Casval Deikun?
The thought was so shocking that she bit down hard on her lower lip. But the next instant she smiled, and a warm feeling welled up inside her.
If so, what a fine man little Casval has grown up to be.
She felt an almost maternal instinct. Char sometimes became involved with the women around him, but he always did it with tact and lived honestly, devoting his entire being to his work and his profession. He was, in fact, one of her favorite young men. If he was actually the little Casval she had once known, she couldn't think of any reason not to rejoice at the thought. This shows a criminal lack of imagination on her part. A very, very criminal lack. A detrimental one, even. Gee, I wonder if he might have ulterior motives. Gosh golly gee willikers! She turned her gaze to the red swordtails swimming clockwise in her aquarium, and tried hard to regain her composure.
I wonder why he changed his name when he returned to Zeon,
she thought. Char had always seemed a little unusual, in a nice way, for a military officer, and now it all made sense.
What a surprise, she thought, with a slightly hysterical laugh.
Ooh, I've been wanting to do one of those for a while. Golly. With her mind so fixated on the image of the little Casval she had adored, it was hard not to feel proud of him now, even if he had infiltrated the principality under an alias. She did not condone his actions, but neither did she blame him entirely. After all, she was also partly responsible. Something in her subconscious had merely prevented her from making the connection between Char and Casval. Perhaps she had instinctively known she could better use Char for her own purposes if she did not know his true background. She reflected on the fact that Casval had surreptitiously obtained the Aznable family register, that he had been at the top of his class in the military academy, and that he had distinguished himself with valor in combat as someone with new type potential. In doing so, she found herself respecting him all the more. He had taken a roundabout way, but what pluck he had! If he had merely wanted revenge, it would have been far easier for him to simply rally the remaining progressive forces on Zeon and use them to carry out an assassination plan. His methodology was beyond her comprehension, but she admired his idealism intensely. It reminded her of his father, Zeon Deikun, who had tried to obtain power through the will of the people. Char, she thought, must be a true new type, a product of the space age. If she was incapable of objectively analyzing the situation and realizing how dangerous Char had actually become, she was none the less on guard.
I can understand it in a way, Casval, she thought,
as though addressing the lad of her memory,
but you're still naive. Watch out. The real world, the adult world, is far more cunning than you imagine.
Caecilia resolved to confront reality and act immediately on the information in Darcia's letter. She drank some coffee and issued several commands to her forces. Then she steeled herself and sent for Char Aznable. She knew she could still use him for her own ends. After all, he had sworn allegiance to her. If he pulled out his pistol and shot her on the spot, that would be her destiny, but he would be destroyed with her, which was an almost romantic notion. If, on the other hand, nothing happened, she was also prepared. If, on the other hand, nothing happened, she was also prepared. She had always believed new types were like double-edged swords and had to be handled with extreme caution. In wartime, they could be used as weapons. In peacetime, they could be made into heroes or scapegoats, depending on the need. When the war was over, she planned to see how the general public felt about new types and champion the popular mood. Char Aznable would be an important asset for her then. But for now, as long as the war continued, she would let him be the hero. She would let him develop, and the stronger he became, the greater his destructive power would become. He would be her own personal weapon. Char, meanwhile, was not oblivious to his position. He knew Caecilia was a schemer, and he knew why she had taken him under her wing. To protect himself, he had deliberately cultivated a mysterious air.
She had often said, "Simply possessing paranormal abilities is unlikely to affect a person's basic personality. The persona and paranormal potential are separate."
And as far as he was concerned, he wanted her to continue thinking that way. It was safer for him. Margaret Ring Blair had no idea of the level of deception in which Caecilia and Char were engaged. As one of Caecilia's lower-ranking secretaries, she was privy to little important information, and her actual work mainly consisted of receiving mail deliveries and ushering people in and out of Caecilia's office. But after Crowley Hammond had visited Caecilia's office, even Margaret could tell that something big was happening. It was evident from the way the head secretary rushed into the office and the way Char Aznable briskly walked right by her, ignoring her presence. He was radiating nervous energy. "I'll finish reorganizing my unit in an hour, Excellency," Char carefully announced. "Of course, we'd ideally like to have 2 Elmeths at our disposal." He knew it was out of the question. He had mentioned the Elmeths half in jest, hoping to defuse the strange tension he felt in Caecilia.
"Don't ask for the moon, Commander," she admonished him, interpreting him literally. "We do, however, have a Brabro available, a type of mobile armor developed at the same time as the Elmeth. It's still in the prototype stage, but would you like to try one out? As far as I know, there are 2 in the assembly hangar here on Abo Aku."
She turned on her intercom and casually ordered her secretary to arrange a visit to the hangar for Char. He detected both nervousness and condescension in her manner. She was acting overly flippant about the whole matter. He knew something was wrong. And then he heard her words.
"By the way, dear Casval."
Char understood immediately. He had long dreaded the day when his cover would be blown. But meeting Chalia Bull had changed him, and what once had seemed terrifying was now merely an irritation and a disappointment, for if he had been a true new type, he ruefully realized, he would have been able to anticipate it. But he had not. He had no idea that Caecilia knew. There are 2 hads there, that's important. He had had no idea that Caecilia knew. So much, he thought, for his own new type potential. The disappointment was tempered by the fact that he had never totally convinced himself that he had new type potential. Nor, for that matter, had he ever completely believed the prevailing view in the Principality military, that new types were ordinary people who suddenly manifested paranormal abilities. To him, true new types were the people his father, Zeon Deikun, had prophesied would appear. Ordinary people with an uncommonly developed sense of intuition and a unique sense of humanity. People who, in adapting to a new concept of time and space in an extraterrestrial environment, would be transformed and develop a new communion with others. People who would, in effect, learn to transcend traditional concepts of time and space in order to survive. Recently, several of the people he had met seemed to confirm his ideas. Lala Soon, Cusco Al, and others had been thoroughly investigated by the Flanagan Institute for New Type Potential, and they did not support Casval Zabi's theory that possessing new type ability did not affect one's basic persona. They had been evolving, and it had been changing them. And if this experience could ever be shared by all of humanity, then, as his father had predicted, mankind itself could truly undergo a transformation. It was too bad that the unusual abilities of new types had first It was too bad that the unusual abilities of new types had first manifested themselves in combat situations, for new types were now becoming disposable tools of the military. They were used, and then they died. Char knew that was one reason Chalia Bull had broached the idea of enlisting the Federation Gundam pilot as an ally. He had wanted to put a stop to it. It was a brilliant idea, and required a leap in imagination so vast that it was reassuring. Perhaps new types already were attempting to transcend the old thinking that had dragged the world into war. Perhaps, subconsciously, he had really infiltrated the Principality years ago, not just in a petty act of revenge for his father's death, but as part of a larger subconscious movement to reform the entire world. It was a notion that made him less fearful of Caecilia. But in that context, his failure to predict her suddenly seeing through his disguise earlier was all the more disappointing, for again, it meant he was not a true new type.
So tell me, Commander, Caecilia asked, was the mask just an attempt to cloak your identity?
It was, Excellency, he replied with a touch of embarrassment. It seems silly, even to me now, but I intend to keep wearing it. Just as people started calling me the Red Comet some time back, it's become something of a trademark.
And are all your endeavors really part of an attempt to rebuild the Deikun faction on Zeon?
That's why I infiltrated the Principality in the first place when I was 15, and that's what I believed until recently.
I must say I'm impressed by your courage and tenacity, and frankly, I don't care what your goals were when you were 15, or even what they were when you first joined my command. I'm only worried about the Char Aznable I see standing before me. I see standing before me now. And related to that, I have a favor to ask. Take off that silly mask and show me what you really look like. I want to see what kind of man little Casval grew up to be.
As Caecilia watched, Char removed his mask. The scar on his forehead wasn't very pleasant to look at, but his face still had the refined look that she remembered. She smiled, but then her expression turned serious. Char had no idea what she was thinking and was frustrated with himself because of it. He was an ordinary human and responded as one. I'm prepared for punishment, Your Excellency. You may do with me as you please. To his surprise, she laughed.
I admire your gallantry, Char, but it's not necessary, she said. Don't you remember what I said? I need you and your unit. That's why I called you here. After we escape from Aku, you can tell me all you want about your feud with my family. But right now, I'm inclined to believe your goal is more than vengeance.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'm relieved to hear you say that. I am, after all, the son of Zeon Deikun. I have no idea what to tell you in this situation. I don't know why, but my hands are shaking. He was half pretending. He wanted to wait to see how Caecilia reacted before deciding what to do next. Acting slightly emotional would give him a screen behind which to plan his next moves.
My brother Girin doesn't trust me, Commander, Caecilia said. Nor do I trust him. Frankly, I'd feel a lot more comfortable facing a frontal attack from General Revel than a showdown with Girin, but it seems inevitable. I'm planning to leave Aku and head immediately for the Principality.
Excellency, are you sure?
Yes, and I need your help. I need you to guard my ship.
I understand. As I said, my unit needs to prepare before we can leave. When do you plan to depart?
Probably in 5 or 6 hours. I've got to get out of here before Revel hits us, and I'm not going alone. I'm going to take some of my forces with me.
But, Excellency, if Caecilia were seriously thinking of staging a revolt against her brother, it would be far easier said than done. The central colony of the Principality of Zeon, Zum City, had a defensive perimeter around it, and Char knew the Principality was capable of using the System Project laser cannon for more than one blast. If Caecilia succeeded in escaping from Aku, the authorities in Zum City would know about it almost instantly, and it was just possible, he surmised, that they might even make her a direct target of the cannon. At last he thought he understood why she was acting in such haste. She was probably included in the target Girin had selected. There was no other way to explain her decision to abandon Aku. But from the skirmish with Federation forces he had experienced earlier, he had learned one thing. The Principality had had a 70% chance of losing, but with the system project, its victory now seemed almost guaranteed. I'm going to reread that with the correct emotional emphasis on certain syllables. I am running out of fluid. This is bad. But from the skirmish with Federation forces he had experienced earlier, he had learned one thing. The Principality had had a 70% chance of losing, but with the system project, its victory now seemed almost guaranteed. Much better. I feel much better about that. It's the system project, isn't it, Excellency? Char said. Forgive me for saying so, but don't you think you're rushing your decision?
You don't know what you're talking about. Can you imagine being hit by a laser beam 6 kilometers in diameter?
I can imagine, but if the tide of war clearly shifts in our favor, I can't believe the Supreme Commander would act so irrationally.
You're naive. Put your Casval Deikun identity back on for a second, and remember the way your own life has been consumed by the desire for revenge. Then remember what kind of man Giran is.
A painful point, well taken. But don't you think you're acting a little irrationally yourself?
What are you suggesting? Are you trying to tell me that I should let Giran get away with this? Let him live?
No. There's no chance of us winning if we're caught between Abo Aku and the Principality. I think we should try to escape from Abo Aku just as Revel hits the fortress. It might be difficult, but at least that way we won't have to worry about the guns of Abo Aku being turned on us. They'll be preoccupied with Revel. We should probably take the forces at your disposal, diffuse them in space, and then proceed on a course that lets us converge on the Principality. We'll need all your forces, I suppose.
It's a long shot, Commander. I'm attempting something fraught with danger, and that's why I'm telling you the facts and asking for your help. I want your unit to be in the vanguard.
I'm flattered, Excellency, and I know I've no choice in the matter, anyway. I'll cast my lot with you. But let's wait a little, at least until Revel closes in, before we stage our strategic retreat, so to speak. We don't want it to look like another Granada when you pulled out too soon.
How dare you mention Granada? Leave the planning to me. Just busy yourself with readying your unit and the new Bra Bros. I may even put an entire regular battalion under your command. We need as many ships and machines as possible.
Thanks, Excellency, but as I stated once before, my unit, the 300th Autonomous, is supposed to be a strictly new-type unit. As the Federation's White Base-class ship has so clearly demonstrated, in this new type of combat, numbers are irrelevant.
Understood. I'll leave it up to you, then.
Char saluted, and then Caecilia added,
Perhaps you pity me because of my current situation, but despite what's transpired between us today, I'd still like to consider you my ally, at least for the time being.
Char said nothing at first. Caecilia was a politician who helped prop up the Zabi family, and she was far too clever to pity very much. But he answered straight from the heart. I don't pity you, nor will I belittle you. Everyone is dealt a different hand in life. My own life has been filled with contradictions, too.
Casval Deikun, if it came down to a choice of being shot by Giran Zabi or you, I'd choose you. I can't guarantee your future, and I expect you can't guarantee mine either. Correct?
Correct, Excellency. He saluted again lightly, and straightened his cape. Their conversation was over. At some point he might have to kill Caecilia Zabi, or she might kill him. They would proceed with their own individual destinies. It would be an interesting game. A game, he realized, at which he would have to get much better if he wanted to take power someday. After entering Caecilia's office, Char stopped by Margaret Ring Blair's desk. She looked up at him with fear in her eyes. "Things are taking a turn for the worse," he whispered, "but no matter what happens, I want you to stay alive. I want you to bear my child some day." It was an impulsive, radical statement, and completely out of character for Char, but Margaret accepted it and smiled. She was afraid for their future, but there was a limit to how much she could worry. Somehow, in Char, she was at least certain that there was a future. Lieutenant Rambaral stared at the image on his vidphone screen. On the other end of the connection, the camera panned back and forth 60 degrees, showing him Crowley Hamon's entire living room. Normally, vidphones never displayed images unless the other party answered the phone, but because of Rambaral's Secret Service connections and the fact that Crowley's apartment was essentially in his name, it hadn't been all that difficult for him to activate the camera remotely. Crowley's living room looked the way it always did when she wasn't around, but 2 scarves had been carelessly tossed on a sofa. And that was unlike her. And on a rack underneath the TV monitor, he could also see a handbag with a handkerchief poking awkwardly out of it. Again, it wasn't like her. This was the 3rd time he had checked her apartment in the last 10 hours. "Maybe she did it," he thought, feeling relieved. After informing the Supreme Commander of Char Aznable's real identity, Rambaral's Secret Service unit had been ordered to inspect all ships leaving the Principality. The order had come so unexpectedly that some of his men had questioned the motive behind it, but they were still in the Secret Service and always obeyed their orders. He, however, still wanted to know what was going on. He knew that many Zeon military units in the Mahal colony area had suddenly been prohibited from leaving the Principality, which meant it had something to do with the system project. He also remembered something Giron had said at their last meeting that had puzzled him. "I've been thinking about settling matters for once and for all. Don't worry about what happened with Casval Deikun." At first, Ramba had thought that Giron was simply planning to assassinate Char Aznable, and he had been prepared to carry out such an order if necessary. But with the emergency order to inspect all ships leaving the Principality, there suddenly appeared to be far more going on than apparent on the surface. Giron's overblown ego was clearly acting up again. Ramba thought of Crowley Hamon. She was a fine woman from a good Principality family and loved him deeply, but she had been passed along to him from Giron, and he had never completely been able to shake off a sense of humiliation. She seemed to know how he felt, perhaps because she too had been humiliated by Giron. In fact, it wouldn't have surprised him if she harbored a desire for revenge of her own. Ironically, their bond was strengthened by their relationship to Giron. To find out what was really going on, 2 nights earlier, Ramba had decided to contact an old comrade of his who worked as an SS unit leader, a secret ser... Okay, sorry. This happens when we get particularly long in the tooth on our reading schedules. I am not a natural orator. Nope, it is as an, so it is definitely saying SS, pronounced accordingly. As in Secret Service. Service. There we go. I realize V's don't come through on this mic all that well. It's fine. Someday I am planning on maybe getting a mic upgrade, but then I have to change kind of how I do these, but that's okay. And I don't like change. Oh no! To find out what was really going on, 2 nights earlier, Ramba had decided to contact an old comrade of his who worked as an SS unit leader in the Mahal area. To his surprise, he had easily been able to obtain the information he needed. The man in charge of the Mahal project, Admiral Chapman Jerome, trusted the Secret Service unit attached to him, and, in a moment of candor, apparently let his guard down with them, telling them of the plan to change the Mahal axis so it could directly attack Abo Aku, even boasting of a plan to get rid of Dozle Zabi. The friend with whom Ramba had spoken, moreover, had been equally candid. "Whatever you do, Ramba," he had said, "don't mention this to anyone on Abawaku before we put our plan into action. We serve the Supreme Commander, so I frankly couldn't care less about squabbles in the Zabi family. But this'll make Sovereign Deikun Zabi powerless and make it easy to get rid of Prime Minister Darshia Bakarov. Then Zeon will be ours. Things are starting to look good for us, Ramba." Ramba, going along with the mood, had smiled, saying, "Right. Maybe we'll both get to visit Earth someday after all." Now, Ramba thought, perhaps the fates were presenting him with an opportunity. It was almost as if Crowley had come to him as part of a larger design, had understood what he was thinking, and had put his thoughts into action. The only proof he had was the fact that Crowley was not in her living room, but he wanted to believe it. Neither Crowley nor Caecilia are stupid, he thought. He took a sip of coffee. Then he glanced at the schedule of ships leaving port that day, made sure none were leaving Zum City for Abawaku, and stood up. One of his subordinates entered his office.
"Sir, we heard a rumor that Crowley Hammond was spotted on a ship that left last night. Is it true, sir?"
"Crowley?" he said, feigning surprise. "Surely there must be some mistake."
"Well, sir, apparently someone who looks exactly like her boarded the ship, posing as one of Her Excellency Caecilia's personal staff."
"What? Why in the world would Crowley do that? She said she was going to Island Park for 3 days. What's going on? Why are you idiots telling me this now? Can't you get your reports to me earlier? If only you'd told me."
"Sorry, sir. We had 3 ships leave at the same time last night. And besides, we were told anyone with a pass from Her Excellency Caecilia should be allowed to leave, so we didn't feel the matter needed to be reported."
"And who was watching the ships?" Ramba asked.
"Ensign Tom Nishimura, sir."
"Humph! Just the sort of thing that damn fool would do. Well, what the hell? When Crowley comes back, I'll have a few words with her."
"Yes, sir."
Ramba Ral knew Crowley could not have gone by herself to Caecilia Zabi unless she had also had contact with Darshia Bakarov. Furthermore, if she had posed as one of Caecilia's household members, it meant she was not operating alone but with the backing of a powerful organization. The main thing he worried about now was her safety, whether she would be able to escape from Abawaku before being ensnared in Supreme Commander Girin Zabi's plot. Several hours before the Pegasus II left the Corregidor Shoal Zone, General Revel visited on a launch from his flagship, the Drog. His normally calm face was flushed with excitement as he spoke to the core crew in the briefing room. "What you have accomplished," he said, "is next to miraculous. In one battle, the Pegasus II and its 3 mobile suits have done what normally requires a force 20 times larger. Frankly, I'm absolutely astonished." For the Pegasus crew, these were powerful words. After all, they were spoken by the man who, after being captured during the Battle of Loum, had managed to escape from the Principality of Zeon, the man who had given the provocative, now famous speech, "Zeon is exhausted," and provided the rallying cry for the Federation in its darkest hour. Some people called Revel a brilliant strategist. Others, behind his back, called him an agitator. Given Revel's tactical talents, the Federation might have better employed him as a strategist, away from the front, but he had never been fully trusted in the higher levels of the Federation government, and he had therefore always been assigned to the front. Ironically, he probably preferred it. To the crew of the Pegasus, General Revel was a hero. "I'm convinced you are true new types," he told them, "and when this mission's finally over, I'll see that you're all advanced 2 ranks. But right now, promotions aren't enough. I want you to fight for something even larger, something the Federation can't possibly reward with a mere promotion. The success or failure of Operation Chembalo hinges on your performance.
This may sound strange, but I've realized that it's in the best interest of the entire world that you folks, even more than the Federation itself, succeed. I don't wish to indulge in pie-in-the-sky dreaming in the midst of a war, but I came to visit the Pegasus II today because I believe in you, and because you have made me believe mankind may be capable of fundamental change. History may show that might makes right in war, but I believe the real victors in this conflict will not be the strongest, but those with the most just cause. It must be true. I came here today to ask your opinions, to see if you agreed with my ideas. Well, what do you, as new types, think?
Amaro felt awkward and embarrassed. He and the other Pegasus 2 crew members were all in their late teens or early 20s. Slegger Law was the oldest, and they had always been in awe of Revel. Now they felt like children suddenly asked advice by their grandfather. Bright, realizing their discomfort, stood up and answered first. "It may be true, sir," he said, "that we have achieved unprecedented results in a short time, but if I understand your use of the word new type to be similar to that advocated by Zeon Deikun, in other words, to represent a new step in the evolution of mankind, then I must disappoint you. We're just ordinary people, sir, and not really qualified to answer your question. But I think we'd all agree that the pilot of the Gundam Mobile Unit, Junior Grade Lieutenant Amaro Ray, has accomplished the most in combat, and if any change is occurring in us, it appears to be the most advanced in him. May I suggest we ignore rank here, sir, and ask him to answer your question first, and to speak his mind frankly?" Amaro flushed when he heard Bright's words. He knew Revel's comments about promotions had been more of a gesture than anything else. Perhaps he had been promoted to junior grade lieutenant, but the Federation military organization was so short of people and so in danger of collapse that everyone knew ranks meant little anymore. Still, to be addressed in such respectful terms by Bright made him feel as though he had finally crossed the threshold into true adulthood. It was the doubts about his own ability that made him feel embarrassed. Revel shifted his gaze to Amaro and nodded approvingly, as did several of his aides.
"I've heard a lot about you, young man," he began, "and I'd love to know how you managed to pull off such a feat out there. But first, what do you think of what I said?"
Amaro stood up, shifted awkwardly, then straightened and tried to meet Revel's gaze directly. It wasn't easy speaking in front of the brass. But then he felt the stares of his comrades and turned around. Sayla was looking at him with a warm, encouraging expression. He felt inspired and turned to face General Revel again.
"Thanks for the compliment, sir," he began. "To start with, even I'm not sure what's going on, but you did say you thought the victors in this war would be those with the most just cause, and to be blunt, I have a problem with that. In all the war stories I was raised on, the authors extolled the merits of a just cause, but the authors already knew the outcome of the conflict. They started with the conclusion and adapted the record to fit it." "A point well taken,"
Revel quickly replied with a chuckle. Everyone in the room smiled.
"Yes, sir,"
Amaro answered. Amaro.
Oh, Amaro.
Oh, don't put that down the wrong tube. One sec. Sorry about that.
Oh, no.
There we go. Yes, sir, Amaro answered.
"I've already discussed my theories on tactics many times with those in this room, so I'm going to spare them the repetition. But let me speak frankly about 3 things I've experienced, things I haven't told even my closest friends, things that might help you understand what's going on."
He then proceeded to recount the story of his contact with Lala Soon on the Texas colony, and with Char Aznable and Cusco Al in the Corregidor Shoal Zone.
Both Lala Soon and Cusco Al were operating a rounded, flame-shaped type of mobile armor called an LMETH, machines specifically designed for new types, with some sort of thought-activated control system that can amplify consciousness, even project it at another human. But when I encountered Lala Soon, the pilot of the first one, I had absolutely no knowledge of the system, and I was able to communicate with her without it. Char Aznable's another case in point. I ran into him around the same time I contacted Lala Soon and sensed him as an interruption, a static-like sound in the midst of my communication with her. But later, during the skirmish in Corregidor, I was actually able to talk with him. His communication to me was simple, like a threat to kill me, but it was as clear as if he had spoken out aloud. There was no mistaking it. He was reacting spontaneously to the thoughts I was emitting. And then, finally, during the battle in Corregidor, nearly all the crew on the Pegasus II bridge were able to detect the presence of Cusco Al. We were all operating on the same wavelength. If there's anything else to add, it's...
Dozle's unit,
Kai interjected. Right. I almost forgot. When we ran into Dozle's fleet, we were able to destroy his new model machine because our awareness had been amplified after encountering Cusco Al in Corregidor. And after Dozle, we were able to intercept and destroy other, smaller prey because we could feel the waves of fear and aggression emanating from them. Let me try to describe it.
Amaro continued talking for over 30 minutes, sharing his experiences and opinions in detail with everyone present for the first time. Amaro continued. Oh, I just said that. Slegger Law, as if representing the others, sighed hard and long and said, "Wow, the part about contacting Cusco. Oh, that's the wrong voice. The part about contacting Cusco Al and the heartbeat, the London Bridge tune, it's pretty incredible." Revel and his officers were too amazed to comment at first, so Mirai Yashima took the opportunity to speak up.
Of those of us on the bridge, sir, Petty Officer First Class Selah Mass seems to have become the most sensitive. Selah, why don't you tell them what you've experienced?
Me?
Selah looked up, shocked on hearing her name. She hesitated, glancing first at Revel as if to ask permission to speak. One of Revel's aides quickly bent over and whispered in the general's ear.
Let's hear her out, sir. She's the petty officer who saved the Pegasus crew on Texas. I'm damned curious about what she has to say, sir.
Curious?
Selah echoed, overhearing.
That's right. We did a background check on you.
The officer announced.
Oh, I see,
she said softly, suddenly realizing that her secret was out. Steeling herself, she continued.
Then let me preface what I'm going to tell you. I joined this ship as a civilian, but I'm proud of the fact that I'm pulling my weight around here.
Revel gently interrupted.
We're aware of that, Artesia Som Deikun, and let me add, it pleases me to be able to address you by your true name.
Selah's fellow crewmates were the most shocked. Except for Amaro, despite living and working with her day in and day out, they had never realized her true identity. Kai, unable to remain silent, summed up everyone's thoughts when he exclaimed in disbelief,
Deikun? The same Deikun as in Zeon Zum Deikun? You've gotta be kidding!
Selah just smiled, but Bright gently reprimanded Kai for speaking out of turn. Then he nodded at her, encouraging her to continue. As Amaro watched, Selah straightened and thanked the general for his kindness. He felt so proud of her that he wanted to proclaim to all present that she was his woman. But then he realized with embarrassment that their level of involvement gave him no right to such a claim. It was still mostly physical.
I am the child of Zeon Zum Deikun, sir, Selah began again, but my father was not a new type. He only proposed and advocated the new type concept. And like him, unless something indicates otherwise, I'll always believe I'm an ordinary person, too. I think the same thing's true of Amaro Ray. What he's accomplished is a fact, but we still don't know what it means in the larger scope of things. We're not in a position to control the abilities emerging in ourselves. There's just one thing I'd like to say, sir. Personally, if you really believe we're emerging new types, and you... Oh, boy. Personally, if you really believe we're emerging new types, and you really believe new types are going to help transform mankind, then I think you should stop using us as some sort of secret weapon. Stop using us to wage war.
Revel replied slowly, as if mulling over her words.
Let me congratulate you on your bluntness, Miss Artesia Deikun, he said. But from what I've heard here today, it would seem that if someone like young Amiral Ray here can actually see into another's past and future, it would indeed indicate a dramatically raised consciousness. And if, as we also assume, he's just an ordinary human, that would indicate anyone's capable of the same thing. Unfortunately, I'm not smart enough to be able to predict how this ability would affect people or the world. Perhaps our junior grade lieutenant could again tell us what he thinks.
Amaro noted that Revel had finally relaxed in front of everyone. His eyes had a new youthfulness to them, and his gaze was more clear and direct. If all leaders were like him, he surmised, mankind might not have made so many colossal blunders throughout history.
Sometimes I feel terrible, he began, because I can't control what's happening to me. But there's something even more important than control. As my abilities increase, I wish I could become a better person, too, but it's not happening, and that scares me. For example, we're part of a military organization with all its constraints, hierarchies, and limited perspectives. I'd like to be able to transcend that as an individual, but I don't think I ever can. We live in a real world dominated by political organizations, governments, and the military, and as long as these exist, there'll always be conflicts. Even if Zeon Deikun's theory's true, I don't think people will ever evolve to the point where they no longer need conflicts. Maybe a special group of new types living in some sort of hermetically sealed environment could, but we don't live in an isolated world. We live in a real world where we'll always have to interact with a variety of people. To transcend that would require a superhuman effort, and we'd probably still be used as weapons. To be perfectly honest, it's depressing. I wish we had more power. I wish we had more support. If I were a true new type, I'd love to achieve some sort of total psychic breakthrough, to achieve total harmony with others. If universal harmony with all mankind, regardless of background or station in life, were really possible, I'd feel ecstatic. But right now, I'm having enough trouble just harmonizing with myself. One of the main reasons I want to stay alive is that I want to see what's possible. In fact, I'm willing to do almost anything to survive. But that's probably an old type concept. It's frustrating.
General Revel merely nodded in understanding, but the officer who had earlier whispered in his ear answered,
Don't worry, lad. A lot of us, myself included, would give their right arm to experience what you have, even for an instant, even if it was totally accidental. To be able to literally fuse your mind with that of another human seems like an incredible experience. It's something that you should treasure.
No, Amro responded emphatically. You miss the point.
What?
His attempt at sympathy rejected, the officer was suddenly angered.
As long as the experience is random and accidental, Amaro continued, then the new type concept isn't real. It's only a dream. And dreaming's not going to end the war or bring about some idealized transformation of mankind. As long as the experience is random, the people with real power in this world are going to ridicule us and classify us as paranormal freaks. They'll just use us to justify their own dogmas and prejudices, just like the Jabro bureaucrats on Earth use the entire Earth Federation Space Force as a big shield to hide behind. I'm getting really scraggly here. Amro's voice is hard on the best of times, because I don't naturally hit that octave.
To Amaro's surprise, General Revel seemed to agree.
A very astute observation, Mr. Amaro Ray, he said. I understand your feelings perfectly. The new type concept is a double-edged sword, with both positive and negative potential. But having said that, I'm going to give all of you an order based on my own old-type logic. The 127th Autonomous, centered around the Pegasus II, is to continue proceeding in the vanguard of the attack on Alboaku. I'll have 3 squadrons accompany you, but I'm not sure how much protection they can provide. As the conflict escalates, I want you all to evaluate the situation autonomously and to take independent action as you see fit. I want victories. But remember, I also want you all to return alive. That's all I have to say.
And with that, General Revel stood up and left. A bluish-white rocket engine flare streaked through the blackness as the Pegasus II continued at full speed toward Aboaku. Even as they cleared the Corregidor Shoal Zone, the path to Aboaku was by no means unobstructed. Giant boulders and fragments of old colonies, debris from the destruction of war, remained. But this time the ship tried to use the obstacles as cover, zigzagging forward from one to the other after identifying them with laser sensors. At the helm of the ship, Mirai Yashima understood why her skipper had decided to employ such an unorthodox tactic and marveled at the way human psychology worked. The debris couldn't afford complete protection, and there was even a possibility of enemy Zakus lurking in ambush, but the crew nonetheless clung to the meager security it afforded. When she looked out at space, at first nothing would seem to be moving. Then she would suddenly spot a huge rock or a fragment of an old colony bearing down on her, and it would fill her entire field of vision. She would quickly check the laser sensor monitor built into the wall, get a reading on the size of the obstacle, and then, while coming so close that she could see the details on its surface, start to maneuver around it and head for the next one. It was a frightening responsibility. The Pegasus II had an automatic avoidance system, but it was often necessary to override it manually, and that decision and job was left entirely to her. Aggravating the problem, the debris was all backlit, and in the vacuum of space it was hard to deduce size visually. On Earth, the atmosphere tended to blur shapes in the distance, but also to create a sense of distance. Without atmosphere, there was almost no way to get a true perspective. Laser sensors gave readings of size and distance, but in combat zones with a high concentration of Minovsky particles, they were often inaccurate. The entire crew of the Pegasus II was dressed for combat. All officers wore pistols strapped on top of their normal suits. What had once been called spacesuits before before mobile suits were developed. The entire crew of the Pegasus II was dressed for combat. All officers wore pistols strapped on top of their normal suits. What had once been called spacesuits before mobile suits were developed. And life support kits. None of them knew when, if ever, they would be able to take the uncomfortable suits off again. Mirai felt a chill. It started around her waist, crawled up her spine, past her neck, and made her scalp tingle. She felt strangely out of place, and wondered what in the world she was doing, piloting the ship through such an absurd situation. Too bad I can't quit, she thought. I'd feel a lot safer farther back. She didn't mean the rear of the unit. She meant someplace far, far removed from the world of combat. She wasn't even sure if such a place existed anymore. She had left her home in the Earth's Far East at the age of 10 with her father. He was a second-generation politician from a family famous throughout the Federation. But he was also a self-righteous idealist who had nothing but loathing for the Federation. Unable to stand the machinations that were part of normal government in the Federation, he had volunteered for life as a colonist and left with her to live in space on Side 2. Just before war broke out between the Principality of Zeon and the Earth Federation, Mirai had returned to her birthplace on Earth for a visit. But then the war had But then war had erupted, and her entire family had been destroyed, along with most of Side 2. In reaction, Mirai had volunteered for service and been assigned to the Earth Federation Space Force. Because of her name and connections, she could have easily asked for a post in the rear, away from the action, but she had refused. She had known an Earthbound assignment would have been against her father's wishes, and she had loved him, as idealistic as he was. Besides, her brother and sister had also died in space. She was in no frame of mind to be left behind on Earth, even if it were safer. Mirai's situation was hardly unique on Pegasus 2. Almost all the crew, including those who had joined the military before the war erupted, had a strong bond to space. They came from colonies that had been targeted by Zeon forces, and most of them had lost relatives. Hardly anyone had come from Side 6, or, like Amuro, from the uncompleted Side 7, both of which were relatively unscathed. Nearly a third of the crew had volunteered for service after the war began. Most, like many of the officers and enlisted men throughout the Earth Federation Space Force, had every reason to hate the enemy. And this set them apart from the politicians and bureaucrats on Earth, even from the general staff sheltered in its underground complex in Jaburo, South America. The gap in consciousness between those on Earth and those on the front lines in space was probably inevitable, but it didn't seem right to Mirai. She had inherited her father's idealistic streak, and she abhorred the current makeup of the Earth Federation establishment. She knew the fear she felt standing on the bridge of the Pegasus was something the officials sheltered underground in Jaburo would never understand. The vastness of space created an enormous potential for error and mistake, and if it overamplified the fundamental misunderstandings that normally occurred between men, it might fundamentally, permanently tear the human race apart. Perhaps, she thought, that was why humanity so yearned for the transformation the new type concept symbolized. She stood ready at the helm, mustering every ounce of strength in her arms to counter the fear that surged through her body. She was thankful for the weightlessness because it made it easier to stand. In fact, it made it just as easy as sitting or lying down. All she had to do to hold her position on the floor was to turn the electromagnets on her boot soles on max. Suddenly, an enormous fragment of a space colony wall, perhaps one-third of the original structure, soared into view, and in her earphones Mirai heard the skipper yell out her name. For a second, she wondered if she had been dreaming. The port side of the ship shuddered as the Pegasus heaved up and over the colony fragment, barely clearing it. Bright's voice echoed again. "Don't think about it, Mirai. Just look straight ahead and steer. Ignore the laser sensors. Turn the damn things off. Put your mind on autopilot." She knew everyone on the bridge was getting nervous. Then she heard Ensign Marker Clan's angry, reprimanding voice cut in on top of the skipper's.
"We've broken through the second combat line. Mobile suits launch in 5 minutes.
All right, Bright grumbled, irritated. So I was a little excited. You can turn the sensors back on now.
Through her helmet sun visor, Mirai could see Bright, nervously fiddling in the captain's seat in his normal suit. She glanced at him and laughed.
"Skipper," she said. "What?"
It'll work out.
"Have faith."
Have faith. Have faith? You were shaking back there like a leaf yourself.
"I was. I admit it. But the Pegasus will make it, sir."
"This one of your new type premonitions?"
"Interpret it any way you want,"
Mirai answered. Then, turning to Sayla, she said,
"You agree with me, don't you?"
Sayla swallowed hard and replied,
Yes, but we might have to make a few sacrifices.
Something about her response was unsettling to Bright. "You all right, Sayla?" he asked.
Yes, sir, she answered softly. I'm just a little scared too, that's all.
Mirai knew it was more than that. "What's going on?" Bright demanded, pushing the issue. Mirai just said we ought to have faith. I believe what Amuro said to General Revel earlier. But if we don't get through the jam we're in now and work to end this war fast, what he said'll never come true. If Girin Zabi wins, forget about the whole new type concept, at least as Zeon Deikun believed in it.
But Skipper, Mirai cautioned, you can say the same thing if the Federation wins. The Federation's not all that different in its attitude to new types.
But if the Federation wins, we'll at least have some more time to think about what to do next. Not so if Girin Zabi does, Bright retorted. It was an idea with which Mirai found it hard to disagree.
And with that, we are going to call it for the day. This turned out to be a much longer one than anticipated. Sorry. Mostly because my performance radically degrades. Proportionate with duration. Geez, how long is that? That's manageable for next week. That's manageable. Next week, I mean, things were like dramatic. This week's installment was basically ratchet up the tension, and also make sure that the audience knows this is where everyone's at. This is what the various cast are thinking. This is how they feel about the issues. This is what they think of the conflict. This is their headspace, and you don't always see that in anything really. And when you do see it, it's often done in kind of a ham-fisted, hackneyed way, in a way that feels kind of boring. And I think Tomino sometimes verges on the aggressively repetitious, mostly because like the facts on the ground are pretty findable. And the evidence is there, and you've got people coming from similar backgrounds, and that's also kind of a narrative way to show, oh, these people are just people. They're not so different in a lot of cases. Like the fact that Char's group and Amuro's group are coming to largely the same conclusion in terms of we need to talk to each other. We need to communicate this one out, because what's best for us is not necessarily what's best for or what's best for the political elites is not what's best for us necessarily, and we have an opportunity to maybe do something about that. And sometimes you have sections that are kind of just reiterating kind of just stuff that you've just heard, and that's largely to show that yes, this character is in fact on the same page, instead of making it an assumption. And I think that's actually useful and relevant because people aren't generally on the same page, particularly if they're on completely opposing sides of a conflict. They're often not coming on the same page. They often don't know the same things. And it's just interesting to see that done. I think another example of that that I can name off the top of my head, and I don't remember the name of the series, and I am going to have to struggle to see the name of the author. What is their name? Where are you? I can just barely not make it out. Stephen R. Donaldson. I don't know what the series is called. It's 5 books long. It includes the volumes. I have to take my headset off again because it doesn't have a long enough cable. The Real Story, Forbidden Knowledge, A Dark and Hungry God Arises, and Chaos and Order. Oh wait, no, there's a lot more than that. And This Day All Gods Die. I don't know if anybody can hear that because I'm holding it off of my head and trying to shout into the microphone. Stephen R. Donaldson, I don't remember what the series is called. Let me go look it up real quick. Yeah, apparently the amulet thing is something that certain, I think they were fighter pilots. And now I can't remember which side of the World War II conflict it was on. I don't know if it was Japan or the US or both. It might be one of those universal weird things. It's not, I was like, this can't be true. But then I heard it corroborated somewhere completely unexpected. And I was like, oh, this is an actual historical document, and this is being mentioned. What's going on? That's a little strange. I thought that was just silliness, that just like a reasonably plausible, kind of goofy, superstitious thing. It was like, no, 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 this is a reasonably plausible, goofy, superstitious thing because it's an actual thing. Give me one sec. Yeah, ask. It might be a Navy thing. It might be an Air Force. I don't know. I can't remember the context because it's been a while since I read. What was that called? It was some. I don't have that book anymore either. I went through a World War II phase because it was vaguely fascinating to me, so I bought a bunch of literature on it, and it came up bizarrely. Stephen R. Donaldson. He's not dead yet? He's not dead yet. Yay! What is the series called? The Gap Cycle. Um, it's literally the ring cycle, but in space. And that is a compliment. That is not meant to make it sound derivative. It actually works. It's quite good. I came across it at like a library book sale. Like all the volumes there were collected on the cheap. And I was like, I'll give this a whirl. They're all like 10 to 50 cents a piece. Why not? And it was great. I was like, oh my God. And I have never read anything else by him. I keep meaning to, and I'm like, maybe later. Maybe later. Um, I want to say the one I do want to read is the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, which is about a guy who lives in a world where magical and divine things are actually happening pretty much constantly. Um, and then he has leprosy, and he's like, I don't believe in any of this shit. This stuff's nonsense. uh, I don't since I haven't read it, I don't actually know more than that. But he's kind of a snarky guy, even though he's confronted with like actual miracles. He's like, nope, nonsense. It's trickery. Yeah. So the gap cycle, I really do want to get around to reading. The biggest barrier for me doing the gap cycle read aloud is the first volume is filled with some of the most horrific abuse to an individual human being that I think has been put down. Well, okay, it's not that bad, but it's pretty bad. It's bad. Like I'm not immediately predisposed to squeamishness. It takes somebody completely unself-conscious or deliberately writing the most horrendous shit they can think of to make me feel at all uncomfortable, and this managed to do it. When I say someone completely unself-conscious, I mean Ayn Rand. Some of the shit she wrote is just like, oh God, please, please stop. Please, anytime you want to just call it a day and stop making me either fall asleep or have to suppress a certain urge to vomit would be a great time for me. Honestly, the worst thing I can say about Ayn Rand is her work is often very tedious, especially once you understand where she's coming from and you're just like, get over it. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if your fantasy world worked that fantasy way? It would be great. It would be so nice. Watch her in an interview sometime. It's pretty fascinating. She looks constantly hunted. She looks like a small forest animal that is trying to escape attack. Now, there's good reasons for that, presumably, but this was not intended to be the Frag Bashes Ayn Rand for 10 minutes power hour, but here we are. We're going to cut that off quickly. That said, I think it's worth reading Ayn Rand. I kind of generally agree with. He flew a P-47 Thunderbolt over France and Germany in the 316 Fighter Squad. Wow, real stuff. Very cool. Very cool. It was nasty out there. I'm glad he came back okay. Um,
And I don't know if that was a Pacific campaign thing or the amulet deal. I don't know if that's specific. I don't know what branch of the armed forces that was in. I need to find that book again and reread it. I'd have to go through my list. I don't document things well enough for what I've read and haven't. Some people do. Some people are like, "Oh, here's my entire backlog." I'm like, if I were confronted with my backlog beyond what's on, right in front of me on my wall, I'd be in catatonia. I couldn't get any reading done at all. At any rate, um, I think it's back to my point that I was going to harp on. By Alan Moore. Alan Moore, the quote is attributed to, I believe. And he basically says, you should earn, especially if you're a creative type, which I personally will always say, um, I'm not a creative type. Creative endeavors frustrate me. They are not my cup of tea. I don't consider this a creative endeavor. I consider it appreciation, maybe at most. I appreciate the creative endeavor. I can't partake. I either don't regard myself as talented enough, or and that sounds like he's negging himself. No, it's like I know what I like and I know what I don't like, and I'm not confident that I could write what I like without seeming so wholly derivative that it would be obvious where I was coming from. And I know most creative types struggle with that constantly. But
This isn't your power hour, it's mine. So, hi, it's all about me. I'm the narcissist today. Yes.
anyway, Alan Moore has a quote running something like, "Do absolutely read everything." Particularly if it's something adjacent to yours. Especially read things that are mediocre or bad, because that way you, as a creative type, won't make those mistakes. There's something to learn from that. I think reading Ayn Rand is important to do, just so you can get at least exposure to another ideology, even if I don't happen to agree with it, even if I happen to think it's fantasy, and also sometimes disgusting, as in the Fountainhead, for instance, which is rather infamous. I believe I'm pretty sure everyone is largely on the same boat as I am on that one, where it's like, person being like, yeah, no. She definitely wanted it, and she definitely didn't, but she totally came around to it. Is kind of like, let's back off on that, please. That's a little. No, that was a rape. Anyway, it's the Fountainhead, right? Not Atlas Shrugged. Sometimes I read them like one right after the other, so I often get them conflated, which is bad. It's a bad habit of mine. I've done that a bunch of times, and as I get older, I can't keep the two straight. Anyway, enough about Ayn Rand and how much her work is kind of horrible to read sometimes. Yeah. So the reason why these are so rough is because I do them live in front of a studio audience. There's no studio. It's just me and whoever's tuning in. No, I mean I know that's Air Force, but I mean I know it's the European theater. I mean the amulet thing, whether that was a fighter jet thing or a fighter pilot thing or a Navy branch thing. I don't know. I can't remember. I remember seeing it in a historical book where they're like, oh, and they like to collect talismans. Might have been the word they used, not amulet, um, which is often a lock of a girl's pubic hair. Bizarre as that sounds, a girlfriend's pubic hair. Um, so I don't know which branch of the yeah. I agree that the Fountainhead is indeed too much information. That is, it's a whole thing. Anyway, I'm probably pissing people off. The reason these are so rough is because I do this live in front of me and whoever's listening to it. Um, I do it on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Um, I just lost my train of thought. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, starting at noonish Eastern Standard Time, East Coast U.S. time, whatever that is. Now that we've gone through the leap forward interchange. I don't know if that's EDT or whatever. It doesn't matter. Anyway, Eastern Standard Time, U.S. East Coast time. whatever makes it easier for people to find that in their handy dandy time zone conversion setup. Yeah, so I'll be back next week. Well, I'll be back for the next two times. I'm pretty reliable. I usually start a couple minutes late because I procrastinate. And yeah. I know I ramble so badly on these that sometimes I can't keep track of the line of thought. And it makes sense to me at the time, and then I don't listen to these after the fact. So I because I know I would just cringe in psychological agony hearing myself ramble about things. Um, the Fountainhead has I'm fairly confident it's the Fountain. Now, I'm not going to look this up right now. I'm not going to do it. I don't have the time. Nobody should have the time. There is a particularly anyway, my point is either you have to be unself-conscious and think that horrible shit was okay, basically not have a problem with certain horrible shit as described, or be actively trying to describe horrible shit in order to make me feel particularly uncomfortable. And both Ayn Rand and Stephen R. Donaldson have managed to do it. And that's the main thing that is keeping me from reading the Steve Donaldson series, The Gap Cycle, because the first book specifically, has a bunch of really nasty things being done from one person to another that are quite unpleasant to depict, let alone read. So there. The rest of the series is a lot less horrible in that regard and is where it really is great and kicks off. But that first book is really a doozy. It's like, oh God, he did what? Don't. And no. It's an abuse of power is what it is. There's a power dynamic and it is abused. If you've read the series, you know. If you haven't read the series, and unfortunately you have to read that book for the rest of the entire rest of the context to matter. It's tragic. It's so tragic. Of course I indulge. This is this is what it is. Anyway, I'm indulgent. This is the ultimate act of self-indulgence, by the way. I perceive streaming in all its forms basically the ultimate act of self-indulgence in terms of, screaming into the void and then seeing magical text appear that I didn't type myself, affirming that I have made an impact. Like, let's make no bones about it. This is totally easy to fall into a head trip. Like it's an entire head trip, ego trip thing. And I try to keep it real, but I acknowledge that I probably am not always keeping it real. At any rate, I try to be reliable. This year is a toughie, mostly because I'm doing 3 different books at once on 3 different days of the week, which I have not historically been doing, and it is not especially easy, I am finding. I'm getting through. I think we can make it through the year. I don't know if I'm going to keep doing it next year, but we'll see. I'm not going to get ahead of myself on that one. I might get used to it. It might be no problem. My schedule might allow for more days. I don't think it will. It looks like that's not going to be the case. It's going to be the opposite, but we'll try and keep doing what we're doing until I can't, which is pretty much the definition of life, really. Keep doing what you're doing until you can.
Wow, that was really pithy and sage, Frag. Whoa, he's such a seer. He's a visionary, man.
Yeah, well, let me say something that could get greater men crucified. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other, because it's worked out so well up until now. Also, it's a mantra, and if you can repeat the mantra to yourself often enough, it might come true, right? And on that happy, overly self-cynical note, way too self-cynical, I'm tired. I'm gonna go. Y'all have fun. I hope you enjoyed. Um, Things are going to be pretty dramatic either next installment or the installment after. It's like you can tell the way this just ended, where it's like we are at the top of the roller coaster, at the top of the last hill of the roller coaster, and think this is the climax. This is where it all comes due. Whether it works for everyone involved or not, I don't know. Hopefully people dig it though. Alrighty, see you all later.
Have a good one.
Thanks.